It was very long. It went through 6
Yeah, that was my question, Director Gisborne. I think because it was tabled at the board, it's going to come back to the board no matter what. So it's kind of hard to.
Recording in progress.
Oh,
You're welcome back.
oh, I'm back. Okay. Well, we're on record now. So unless there's anything else, I will call this meeting to order of the Finance Committee, March the 11th, 2025. I'd like to acknowledge we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on qathet, also known as Lasqueti Island. Excuse me. We have an agenda before us. Is there anyone who would like to move that or make proposed changes to it? Director Gisborne?
Yes, I'd like to move, but with the addition of item 6.1 that was originally on our agenda.
Okay, so the original item 6.1 was the Resource Recovery Center, the item that's still unresolved. So I'm going to ask our corporate officer if that is in order to consider, corporate officer, because it's been the item was the motion underlying it was tabled at the board meeting. Corporate officer.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that last item was postponed to a certain time after we received a response from the city of Powell River. It was postponed at the board table. And so it was originally intended to hit a board meeting today. However, so that could be the case. The membership of this committee is the membership of the board. So I'll leave it up to you, Chair, to ask the membership what they'd like to do. Debate on that item has already occurred at the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee would need to extend the limits of debate.
Right. So I think the proper thing, Director Gisborne, would be to bring that up at the board meeting today, if you would like to talk about it today. Director Gisborne?
Yes, I believe we just heard from the corporate officer that it's actually up to the Assembly if we want this to be discussed today at the Finance Committee meeting. And as it was on the agenda until this morning, and it does have an impact on our financial plan related between the difference of 1.4 million or 2.5 million, I think it is a worthwhile thing to be discussed when we're having our last Finance Committee meeting before we get into our financial planning finalization at the end of the month. Because otherwise, if it comes up at the end of the month, it's a big ticket item at the 11th hour. I think we can make consensus here today and make a good recommendation to our board meeting for when we go to final adoption.
Okay, so that would be up to the board. So is that a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of the former item 6.1?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, so let's seek a seconder for that. Is there a seconder for that? I don't see any seconder. Okay, Director Elliott? Oh, I see Ms. Green, but Director Elliott, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not sure I entirely understand the procedural element that you're referring to. It seems that we're questioning whether there's given the motion was at our our regional board meeting, whether there's the authority to talk about it at the Finance Committee, if I can use those words. And I'm not entirely sure I understand that. So yes, I'm okay with seconding the motion, but I'd also like to understand why you think it's not within the authority of the Finance Committee to talk about.
Okay, so I'll go back to our corporate officer to explain again. So I guess part of the question is it within our authority if we so choose? The normal process, I guess, is what I was talking about, that it would have, as explained, would have come back to our board meeting at the scheduled time. So the question now is it within order to put this item on the agenda for discussion and potentially putting forward a recommendation to the board? Corporate officer?
Okay, thank you through the chair. So my understanding is the motion was postponed to a certain time until we received the correspondence from the city of Powell River. At the finance committee today, the correspondence is on this agenda. However, the board postponed the motion, and so that authority sits with the board. Also, the motion has been discussed at finance before, so the limits of debate may be exhausted. So we haven't really, you would have to, I do think it's better to deal with it at the board table. It may be appropriate if we're concerned with timing to refer it to staff for inclusion on today's board agenda, and we could have that occur before we can have it republished on the board agenda today.
Okay, so maybe, sorry, go ahead, Director Elliott.
Well, this is a motion on the floor to include this item in the agenda. Can we refer this motion to the board?
I think procedurally, Director Elliott, I think what would be appropriate, and I'll confirm with the corporate officer, would be then to consider adding the item as put forth by Director Gisborne onto the agenda. But when it comes up, if we adopted it, then a motion could be put to refer it to the board today. Corporate officer, would that be the proper procedure here? Because I don't know how we do this in this section.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, I think procedurally the absolute proper way to do it is to have it dealt with at the board table. As I said, this assembly is comprised of the membership of the board table, and if this assembly wanted to discuss it, you could do that with a 2/3 majority vote, I believe. I haven't researched that procedure today, but you could discuss it today and elevate it to the board meeting if you want. Alternatively, you could provide direction right now to send it to the board meeting, and we could have it there for discussion.
Okay, so there's two options. One is to add it to the agenda and consider it today to whether we do that or not, or resolve anything now, or whether we approve the agenda as written and then make a subsequent motion to refer that item, former item 6.1, to the board today. So we have a seconder on this, so that the motion on the table is as proposed. So Director McCormick.
Thank you. I don't have strong feelings about it one way or the other. However, it does seem appropriate if the letter from the mayor is coming to this committee meeting that the the subject matter of that letter also be debated at the same time. It seems appropriate to do them together. So I actually support this motion.
Okay, thank you. Corporate officer, I saw you had your hand raised there. I
just wanted to ask through the chair, General Manager of Financial Services, is this item for the budget?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair. This item could be dealt with as a budget amendment. So right now we have it in the budget the way that it was discussed at the December board meeting. So the budget stands with the original funding, but we could deal with this as a budget amendment. So it doesn't, while it would be nice to get it settled, I don't think that it has to be settled before the budget is adopted.
Okay, thank you for that. So it looks like there's a third option here. We could also let it come to the board in its natural course, and then the board could choose to send it to finance and have a discussion there. Okay, so we have we have the motion on the table. I see Director Gisborne. Is there anyone else who wants to speak before I recognize Director Gisborne for a second time? I don't see anyone, I don't think. So Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The reason why I think this is important is when we had our board meeting last month and we had draft 3 of the financial plan and we forwarded it to this finance committee meeting, part of that discussion included that this item related to the Resource Recovery Center and the $1.4 million associated with Community Works funds would be part of that discussion. So that authority, I think, has already come in a way from the board. I my understanding was it would be part of today's conversation. It was on our agenda. Members of the public may or may not have seen the agenda before our meeting, and I'm sure there's a great deal of interest in relation to the $1.4 million of community works funds, which is, typically allocated to electoral area services. And when we start getting into further discussions of our budget in relation to fire hall apparatus and all those kind of things, community works funds could have an impact there. And that's why, I came prepared today based on what was on the agenda, and then this item has been removed. And it seems like we're having a great deal of conversation about how to talk about it rather than actually talk about it. So I'm very much in favor of voting to get this item on the agenda. And when we get to the item, I look forward to hopefully a big roundtable discussion amongst directors to figure out what's our plan. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, you're welcome. Let's see if maybe there's any other discussion. We'll try to get an agenda before us, which would be nice. Seeing no other further hands up. So the motion on the table is to approve the agenda with the addition of the former item 6.1, and then the other items would be renumbered 6.2 and 6.3 as in the agenda previous to this morning. Okay, so that's the question. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the amendment of the motion as put forward? All those opposed? One opposed, Director Brander. Looks like it carried. So, okay, we have that item. We'll renumber and sequence it as in the former agenda. Okay, on to minutes, adoption of the minutes. We have minutes from February the 11th, 2025. Are there any changes or omissions? And if there are none, would someone like to make a motion to adopt those? Director Gisborne, is there a seconder? I'll second that. Okay, Director Southcott. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed, carried. Okay, we have no delegations and inquiries. Correspondence has been, restructured, so we do have the correspondence from the city related to the item 6.1 that was added, but that'll, it's in our agenda, so we can refer to it in 6.1 if we need. So there's actually no agenda. I'm just going to move on. I see your hand, Director Gisborne, but there's nothing to actually discuss here. We're just moving on to unfinished. Okay, go ahead.
Something to your attention. You might not be able to see on your camera, but we do have members of the public. I don't believe we have any registered delegations, but I'm not sure if any of them are coming as an unregistered delegation. So,
oh, thank you. Is there anyone in the public that would like to come forward before us as an unregistered delegation?
We have a hand if not.
We do have
we do have an individual raising his hand.
Okay. Okay, so we'll set that up for that person. I can't see you, so.
Thank you very much. My name is Hans.
Just sit in front of the committee.
Yeah, so come in front, and then you have up to 10 minutes to discuss, and then the board can ask, or the committee can ask questions.
So my name is Hans Brennert, and I live in Area B. To start with, I have to kind of apologize, for not coming and showing more interest about what's happening here. And the reason I'm here, I'm kind of puzzled about the 24% increase in our taxes for Area B. And I just wanted to know why that is, and if anything we can do to alleviate that. And that's about my mission. On top of that, I've been involved somewhat in non-profit and public, and I have to take my hat off for you people to run for office, because sometimes you wonder what the reward is. But anyway, well done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, and I'll offer any questions. But the only thing I would suggest in terms of your question, and I'll maybe give our Manager of Financial Services an opportunity. But if you look in the agenda, there are tables broken out by electoral areas, and the appropriate table for Area B is in the agenda, and I can't find it and speak at the same time, but it's in there, and it lists all the services, and it will identify which services have which changes, so where that actual increase comes from specifically related to services. Ms. Green, do you have any other thing you'd like to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted to add to what you said. So that is on page 33 of that item of business. And that shows the requisition comparison for electoral area B.
Right, so the total amount's down at the bottom, and then that 24% that you referred to And then the specific changes are the sum of all the small, I shouldn't say small, all the individual changes from each service. Okay, is there any questions from around the table? Okay, seeing none, I guess we will move on to our next item, which is 6.1, which is our new revised 6.1, which is, let me just get my old agenda up again. Okay, which is the Resource Recovery Center. So we have, now I did have something to say before we get into this. So just to review where we're at, and I'll look to our corporate officer to correct me. We've had some fairly animated discussions last autumn regarding how to fund the 2.5 million that we agreed to provide to complete the Resource Recovery Center. The original staff recommendation was to fund this using borrowing, and that original motion from last September, proposed motion, is in our agenda. Former Director Doubt put forward an alternate motion to fund this using 1.4 million from Community Works funds and 1.1 million from borrowing. After discussion, this motion was tabled at the September 25th board meeting, and the board chose to write to the City of Powell River to request matching use of Community Works funds based on two factors. First, that the waste management service is a regional service that benefits the entire regional population and is funded by all properties in the QRD. And second, that the Community Works Fund to the QRD is based primarily on rural population levels, while the Community Works Funds to the City of Powell River is based primarily on municipal population levels. We've received a letter, which is in our agenda, from the City of Powell River declining our request, which brings us back to the original question of how do we fund the 2.5 million and the tabled motion that was put forward by former Director Doubt. Now, that tabled motion is not on the table here. It doesn't come back to the table here. It was put forward at a board meeting. So as the corporate officer described earlier, that will come naturally back on the table. It could come today or it could come in 2 weeks to the board, but it will come back there. So we're not actually talking about the tabled motion as far as I understand. But I believe if we've put this on the agenda, we have two things that we could do. One is we could request or refer this item to the board meeting today if we wish to have a discussion at the board today. We could also, I believe, make alternate recommendations to the board, but we want to be a bit careful, and I'd want to make sure that procedurally it's okay, because if we're putting forward an alternate recommendation, we have the tabled motion and the old recommended one, we want to make sure that we're procedurally not muddling things up. So is that, first I'll go to the corporate officer, is that more or less the status of where we're at and what we are able to do right now?
Thank you, through the chair. That was a pretty good summary.
Thank you. Tried to help us focus on it. So Director Elliott.
Thank you. So in my version of the agenda, 6.1 is the financial plan changes to draft 3, draft 3, and 6.2 is the item you're talking about. Did we reorder those without me realizing it?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Our original agenda, so you got the current agenda. The agenda up till yesterday, let's say, had 3 items in the new business, in the unfinished business. The first one, 6.1, was the Resource Recovery Center financing status update. The second one is the financial plan, and the third one was the correspondence regarding the recreation service. So this item is the Resource Recovery Center item. I thought
that was the 6.2 correspondence, and the one that you're referring to is not in my current agenda. Okay.
Right. So we actually have 2 correspondence from the City of Powell River. One, the 6.3 item relates to the recreation service, and we'll deal with that later. 6.1 relates to the correspondence regarding our request for matching Community Works funds to fund the Resource Recovery Center, that now we've received the letter formally that declines that, where the city declined that. We have this in the agenda. It has the 2 motions. The motion that's on the table for 1.4 million from Community Works Fund and 1.1 million to fund by borrowing, that was put forward by Director Doubt. That's on the table at the board. And then there's the original recommendation that was never moved, which was 2.5 million, funding the 2.5 million through borrowing. So those are the kind of, that's where the play is. Neither of those are really before us yet here. We don't have anything before us here. We don't have a recommendation of how to deal with this. As I said, we can either refer this to the board today and deal with it there, and then this tabled motion can come back, or I believe we can probably put forward some alternate recommendations. And with confirmation from our corporate officer that we don't, do anything that muddles with the fact that we have this tabled motion. I think there are limits on what you can do to undermine or to do an end run around that or whatever it is. Okay, Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Good summary. My understanding is related to the Finance Committee. In September, we passed a motion at the Finance Committee to recommend the board increase the loan for borrowing by the $2.5 million. Then when it came to the board, an alternative motion was presented. That's at the board. That got postponed, and then that went to October. That got postponed again and tabled. And then at our Finance Committee meeting in November, we passed an alternative motion, which was to allocate $1.4 million worth of community works funds. So this committee has actually dealt with both motions. And when they've gotten to the board, there seems to be an issue. Now, when we get to the board, we can discuss those issues in more detail. But I believe that we as a Finance Committee can look at the situation in front of us, which is, okay, we've had two recommendations related to this item that have gone through this Finance Committee meeting, and both of them seem to not be crossing the finish line when they get to the board. So that's where I think we can actually have a good, robust discussion around what do we want to do, and maybe clarify what our points are, and we can put forward different items. Maybe we say we only put $400,000 of community works funds. That would be a different recommendation. However, our corporate officer and yourself are correct. When we get to the board, that motion of the 1.4, 1.1, and all those other items will still be an active motion, which we will then have to deal with at that time, either passing or defeating. But I do think that the Finance Committee has an opportunity to come to a bit of an understanding and a mutual agreement around the table before when we get to the board meeting, where the weighted vote comes into play, and that can make hair stand on ends, and things can get fairly aggressive at times. And that's why I think the Finance Committee is a cooler area to discuss it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I think, and I'll confirm this with the corporate officer, so if we wanted to, so there's three things, besides referring this to board, I think we cannot do anything related to the tabled motion at this time, because that's tabled at the board. We don't have the authority to, undermine that or pull that back. Corporate officer, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
I
think where we're at, everybody summarized it pretty good. This committee can make a recommendation to the board. So
exactly.
If there is a desire to do something else than what is already on the table, this committee can make that recommendation, and that recommendation will appear after the tabled motion. So will appear as a package.
That's great. Thank you for that. And that says it much more succinctly than I was heading down. So that's where we're at. So if we can have a little further, I guess, if there's questions right now, that's fine. And I think otherwise, what I would ideally look for is a motion for recommendation. That would be alternate recommendation, or a referral or something for the whatever the committee would like to do on this. Director McCormick?
Thank you. Chair, I would like to move the original agenda recommendation that is on our agenda as well as in the report. And that is to approve the budget increase of up to 2.5 million.
Okay, very good. Is there a seconder for that? It's on the Director Gisborne. I can't see the screen because I got the I got the motion front. So thank you, Ms. Greenan, sorry, the staff who put that up there. So that's great. So that's that's on the table now. Director Elliott. Oh, and then Director McCormick anyways, Director Elliott, and then whoever else wants to speak.
Director Elliott can go first, and then I'll follow you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Director, I was trying to second, and I also would like to speak to it.
Okay.
So what we discovered through conversation at the City Council, and what I learned there was the comparison was not between borrowing to make up for the community works funds from the city's portion. And so that it would have to come from our actual tax requisition. And so that would considerably increase proportionately the amount of taxes that the city would be paying, because they wouldn't be paying through borrowing. They would be paying their 1 point whatever million through a tax requisition. And so that made it not in the best interest of the city taxpayers. And that's how come we landed where we did. And so given that, I think that providing community works funds to projects in the areas where the money is intended to be, is being generated from, for your water or whatever, what have you, would probably be the fairest way to distribute those community works funds for all taxpayers involved.
Thank you for that. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair.
I see the corporate officer. You might have some procedural stuff for us. Go ahead, corporate officer.
Thank you. Before we proceed, I was just editing the motion as I thought it might be desired. Is the goal to have this elevated to today's board meeting, or would you like it to go to the end of the month?
To the board meeting
Today?
because,
Yes.
if I may, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead,
Because
Director.
that way the budget implications could be included in the final financial plan for adoption. So we'll have a better idea. So
Yeah, so that's, I think, just a friend, unless anyone's against that, that will be added as a adjustment. Director McCormick, carry on.
yeah, thank you. So I move this recommendation because I feel that community works funding truly belongs to the electoral areas. Electoral areas have already put $600,000 in community works funding into this project, and I believe that's quite sufficient. Taking money away from the electoral area capability to improve things like fire halls or the community hall on Texada means a huge cost to borrowing to those residents of those electoral areas. And I think that our community works funding needs to go for electoral area needs. And much as I hate to see any kind of budget increase, I think it's already ridiculously high. I've not been a fan of this project all along. However, we are here, and so I support spreading it equitably through all taxpayers in the region and not putting it on the shoulders of electoral areas to fund half of that. Thank you. That's my reason for moving this recommendation.
Thank you, and I'll add myself to the list unless someone else is burning. I want to thank the city for considering this. I think it's not, and I appreciate the comments by Director Elliott. We had a lot of discussion. We were quite, as I said, quite animated. I think it was a sincere request in good faith to the city, and I think the city did a good faith review of what is best for them. And I think the conclusion, as I understand, is that what's best for the city, from the city's point of view, is that leave this with the regional district to deal with, and if we can agree on the at the board level on the agenda, or the recommendation that's on the table, I think that would resolve it. And I agree with the comments by Director McCormick as well. So I think we can hopefully put this behind us and move on and shake hands on it. And I think it's the best solution to where we're at. I think I support finishing the project. I know we've also had discussions about whether we can afford it and so on. But I do think with the looming economic clouds on the horizon, that this is not going to get cheaper, and inflation could be very high in the next while. So I think it's better just to do it, get it finished, get it fully functional, and put it behind us, and get it fully up and running. I think that's what we spent all this money. Let's make it work. Okay, Director Gisborne. Sorry, Director Gisborne. I see Ms. Greenan has a procedural or other input. Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention, I know Director McCormick, you mentioned that this would be an increase to the budget. I just wanted to mention that the borrowing costs, the debt repayment costs are already included in the draft 3 budget that you have before you. So it wouldn't be, if you pass this motion, it wouldn't be an increase to the waste management budget, a further increase.
Very good. Thank you for that. Director Gisborne and then Director Lennox.
Thank you, Chair. And I know Director Dowd is not here, but I would actually like to thank Director Dowd for the motion he put forward and what he did, which sounds a little odd coming from myself because of the confrontation that it caused. But what it also caused was for us to have a much more in-depth discussion and understanding with the municipality and the electoral areas related to how these services are being funded. The request that came forward from Director Brander, I think, was a good one that went to the municipality, and the municipality their staff had a really good in-depth look at what this would mean for them to share their community works funds. And now that we're coming out the other side, we can say, oh, back in September, the 2.5 was what we had passed it and we wasted time. I don't think we actually wasted time. Some might think we did. But really, I think we're actually now at a better place as a board and as a community to really understand that, there is challenges when it comes to our regional services and our fire halls and our water systems and our electoral area services, that they're not always, perfectly fair and perfectly equitable, but it's our job as a board to try and figure that out, to try and make these more fair, more equitable, and to really understand each other. And I'm greatly appreciative that I think the municipality, they also have understood, how the impacts of community works funds affect the electoral areas. So I'm happy with this motion, and I would also support the item going to this afternoon's board meeting, so that way our staff can get the clear direction to include that in our final draft of the financial plan at the end of the month, because then maybe there's a few things related to apparatus or something that we will realize that we can unlock those community works funds to support electoral area projects in 2025. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. I see Director Lennox was next, and then Director Elliott. Director Lennox?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I lost video there for a bit and had to log back in. Hello from sunny South Carolina. So I'm going to try to stay upbeat during the meeting, but I'm dog tired. So if you see me nodding off, that's why. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the points that the other directors, McCormick and Gisborne, made. I support their comments, and I think we've had a lot of discussion on this. I've learned a lot about community works funds, and I think we're all looking ahead to the future about how to redefine that. I think it's clear in my mind, at least, that those funds are for the electoral areas and should be for us to decide how to use for the benefit of our community. And sometimes that does include the other, the region writ large. The city has decided, done good due diligence, and I really empathize and appreciate where their position is, and they've made their response. So I respect that procedure, and I think it's now time to define what our needs are at the regional district, and I think I've made myself clear. So I'm in support of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to let everyone know that I totally appreciate the comments that you're making around how we learned through this process. And some of the other things I've learned through not just this process, but processes for the rec center, is that it behooves us all to keep a regional mind when we're addressing all issues. Yes, we need to speak up for our area taxpayers, but protectiveness of your taxpayers should not come at the expense of all taxpayers. And so keeping that regional mind is important when we have things like the rec center, and not doing an us and them perspective during those conversations. The city at this point in time is discussing not just the rec center and the community forests and other things that are very much regional minded things. But if you take a protectional view toward our own taxpayers in those conversations, which are handled not here, but over there, you could see that it wouldn't work out great for everybody. And if areas come to the rec center conversation protecting their areas versus thinking regionally, it doesn't set a good relationship for all of us trying to make the best decisions we can. And so I'm in favor of this motion, but I also want folks to remember when we get to other conversations that it's a give and take and a regional mind on all subjects, not just this one. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else want to speak on this before we call the question? I don't see any hands up. So this is on the basically the original motion, the recommendation from September, and elevating it to the board meeting today. So I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Carried unanimously. Very good. It's nice to see unanimity. Okay, so now we're on to item 6.2, which is the draft 3 of the, well, a re-review of the draft 3 of the financial budget, a redux, because we saw it a month ago. We have a number of items that were referred to Finance Committee from the February 26th board meeting that we need to reconsider since they did not fit the surpluses in our financial plan. There are also several recommendations within the staff report on pages 20 to 24. But I'll start by asking Ms. Greenan if she has any information that might help us with our deliberations today. Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to mention that what you're seeing in the package today is the exact same budget that you saw at draft 3. So there were some changes directed at the February 11th Finance Committee meeting. So those would reduce, in most cases, reduce the budget, and they are not included in this draft. The other thing I wanted to mention was when I was reviewing the planning budget, we had a posting error. So there's no worries with the planning budget. It can go back to the way that it was at draft 3. It's not a concern. And the other thing I wanted to mention too was also the General Manager of Planning Services found between the planning service and the development services about $19,000 worth of savings that she would like incorporated into the next budget draft. Yes, so that's all I wanted to mention was just when you're looking at this, just realize that it doesn't include the reductions that were made at the February 11th Finance Committee meeting. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. So before, first I'd like to thank you, and I also appreciated the additional information from the draft 3. We had updates on the surplus, and I think they would flow out into different actuals from last year. And I also would like to thank you for the including the comparison with the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Before entertaining motions, though, I'll first open up the floor to any questions, and with a request to hold off on motions until we address the ones that are first in our agenda, and then the ones under consideration. Director Lennox?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, thanks, Ms. Greenan, for your explanations. And this might be a question for you again, Ms. Greenan. I guess for me, and I think others in the community, I need a little bit of a layman's description of the use of surpluses. I'll just kind of give you, I'm still not there yet, because to simplify it, I'll just say where my context is, and you can kind of maybe correct my misassumptions. That, if we plan for surpluses, we're planning to spend more money than we need. And then on the flip side of it, if a surplus is identified, shouldn't it be returned to the taxpayer unless there's a need to send it to some type of a reserve, not an automatic sort of reaction to send it to reserve. And then it forces directors to kind of pull those things out and be savvy enough to pick those line items out. And you've helped us a lot with some of that. So I think you understand my question is, it's the policy and philosophy of the use of surpluses. And especially in a time when we're in, pressure of these severe increases, how we can adjust each year. Does that make sense?
Ms. Greenan?
Yes, thank you, Chair, through the chair. So what happens is with surpluses, we never budget for a surplus. We always budget, we do zero-based budgeting. So we look at all of the costs that we anticipate and all of the revenues we anticipate, and that there will be no surplus. So ideally, we would come out to zero at the end of the year. But what happens some years is like one year, for example, right now in the Tusquity Island Fire Department, there were a number of initiatives that were planned that didn't get done because of we had some staff capacity restraints. So they have a large surplus this year, but generally the surplus is quite modest. Like, the last few years it's been, maybe $30,000-$40,000 range at the most. And sometimes you experience a deficit in a service. So we don't want to always rely on those surpluses, because we do zero-based budgeting. If we didn't do zero-based budgeting, then of course you would say, okay, last year we spent, $400,000, we should expect to spend, $400,000 plus maybe a 5% increase this year. But because we're actually looking at all of the initiatives we're doing, we try to be very accurate, and we have very, very small if any, contingencies. So what happens with, say with the Northside, we'll use Northside Volunteer Fire Department, for example. If we don't spend as much as we thought, and then use that, in 1 year, we have less capacity, we don't spend as much as we thought, so we want to use that surplus in the next year, then our tax requisition would go down if we had a large surplus. And then the next year, if we didn't have that same surplus, then we would have to say, okay, now we have to increase our budget. So then the requisition would go up. And there's, a fluctuation, right? So 1 year you'd be down, next year you'd be up. So we try to budget for exactly what we need and not rely on those surpluses. But what we do have is we have the contributions to the reserve. So the board consciously makes contributions to the reserves to fund future expenses. Well, the contributions to the reserve can be changed so that there isn't a large increase from year to year in the requisition. Where we get the large increases are when we increase services. So, for example, this year we're increasing services in, for example, in the Northside Volunteer Fire Department, there was an increase to the debt interest rate. So that means that we have to have a budget requisition increase. And also there was a conscious decision to increase the contribution to reserve. So that makes an increase to the requisition. But other than that, if we are always zero-based budgeting and our service levels don't change, then you would just see, the basically increases for the cost of living, or the price increases in materials and labor, et cetera. So that's why we don't really want to always rely on surpluses too much, because we can't rely on them. So
Right.
that, a fluctuation from year to year in our requisition.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe just to follow up, I guess maybe I'm missing something, because what I see is we're planning surpluses.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, through the chair. No, we don't plan the surpluses. Those surpluses that I've projected are, they're not planned. They just happened because in this year, for example, like we had, like I said, we had some capacity restraints in the fire departments, and we couldn't get done as much as we wanted to. In previous years, the surpluses have been quite modest. And a surplus would usually happen if, for example, we had a donation that we didn't plan on, then that would create a surplus, or a grant that we didn't expect to get. There's always something unusual happens that we have a surplus. So no, we always plan to have a zero, to basically spend all of the money that we budgeted.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure I'll learn more as the discussion progresses. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, Director Lennox, that I think if there is any language about planning, it's the planning in this year. Like we might, like we've planned to use surpluses from last year for this year, but it's not planned. You don't plan for the 2025 budget to have surplus, because that should be called reserves. But okay, thank you, Director Elliott. And then I saw Director McCormick, I believe. Director Elliott, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to just add to that conversation some things I've learned over the last number of years around budgeting. In the local governments, it's illegal to run a deficit. You can't spend it if it's not in the budget. And when you're addressing emergency services, it's nearly impossible to know the exact amount of emergency services you're going to require. So from my understanding, we base our budget on sort of the average we've been seeing over a number of years, and applying current costs to that average. And so if you're under average, you might be spending less on your operations. If you're over average or inclining upwards, you might need to rely on reserves to address that. And if the trending is up, increases your averages for responses and things like that. If there are things like in your budget, like you had to replace a fire pump and it didn't get done that year, that fire pump still needs to be replaced. And so the natural place for that budgeted money would be into the reserves, which are flexible to allow you to buy that fire pump still without losing the money that was allocated to it. If you assume all surpluses are unallocated surpluses, you end up in trouble in the future. And so I know those things also factor in, and particularly for emergency services.
Thank you, Director McCormick, and then Director Gisborne. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. On page 9 of the report, there are 2 issues raised. One about reduction in the general administration area, and the other is 2 options about planning. So I'm just wondering, Chair, do we need separate motions apart from what we move overall with the financial plan? Do we need separate motions to address those particular issues?
So I'll before handing it over to Ms. Greenan, on page 24, there's a section called for consideration. So I think the process that I would like to follow is that we deal with items 1 to 5 in our agenda, and then we move on to those ones. And some of those, those are both, there's one item for administration, there's one for planning. I also heard Ms. Greenan give some clarification on planning that nothing needs to be done. But I think that's the process we would do, go to those for consideration items and do whatever we will with them. And then if there's anything else, I think that would be the best process. But Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that's the best process. And to answer the other question, yes, those motions would have to be dealt with as separate motions.
Director McCormick, go ahead.
One follow-up question. Thank you, Chair. At something like 14%, Area D's increase is the lowest of any area in the regional district. And that's not going to be a lot of compensation to the people who I have to tell, they're going to pay a double-digit increase. So what they're going to ask me is, what are the main reasons for this? And I believe I've asked this question before, and either I'm fogging out or I need to be reminded. What are the main drivers for this double-digit increase to everyone?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. So the main drivers are in general administration, we had some large increases that are probably going to be continuing, and those are we've been having a lot of freedom of information and protection of privacy, like freedom of information requests, and we have a small staff. We need assistance to answer all of those requests that we get. And while you can charge for some of the services, a lot of the costs are costs that have to be absorbed. So we're estimating $150,000 increase to hire a consultant to handle those requests. And the general manager of administration services could talk more about that. And then we've also had an increase to hire a human resources consultant. And again, the general manager of administration services could talk about that. We need to invest in an electronic records management system. Right now, all of our records are being handled. We're using the LGM. I can't remember what the name of it is, but we have a records management system, but it's not electronic, so it's our records are getting quite behind. And then as far as destruction and how our records are handled, the electronic records management system would greatly improve that. We need to invest in some security software. That has been a big issue, cybersecurity issues with local governments. I'm sure you've seen in the paper where local governments have been hit with cyber attacks. So we do need to invest in some software to manage that. The other increase is in the planning service. There's an increase just because we did have less transfer from reserve than we did in previous years. We're kind of using the reserve in the planning service to try to level out the requisition so that it doesn't have big spikes and dips. And then In the emergency 911, there is a contribution increase to emergency 911. That is something that is, that budget is supplied by emergency 911. We don't really have too much say in that. In the waste management service, we have some increases due to, we have an insurance increase. And then there's an increase for facilities operation and maintenance because of the expanded facilities. And there's also a large increase to the Liskedy waste transport costs. And the other increases in the waste management service are also due to, a lot of those are due to contract increases, just the costs are escalating. In the paratransit service, we had these are all things that are shared by electoral areas, all of the electoral areas. The paratransit service is not shared by electoral area E, but it is shared by electoral areas A to D. And there's a contract cost increase of 24,803, and that is mainly due because we are anticipating service expansion. In the north side, in the social planning service, there is an increase because we had a negative requisition in 2024. And then we also had the service, we had to add the cost of the service reviews onto that service. Northside Recreation, we were anticipating an increase. Sorry, Northside Recreation isn't, that only is for part of electoral area A. And I think, sorry, you were asking about area D particularly. And then at the Texada Airport, there was $10,000 less prior year surplus than there was in 2024. So those are the main drivers of the increases that you'll see in area D. And most of those are across most of the services.
And if I might add, Director McCormick, if you look on page 35, which is the annual requisition comparison for electoral area D, the requisition change percent column shows the percent change for the service, and what you're getting at, I believe, is the percent change or the percent contribution to the increase. So the 14.67% increase that you referred to is at the bottom. That's actually reflects $160,000 about of increase. And if you look at where that comes from, about half of that is regional services, about a quarter of it is shared services, and about a quarter of that is Texada services. And of the regional services, about a quarter of the overall is from general admin, and then an eighth is from waste management. So those are the bulk of that, and then little smaller amounts for the other services. For the shared services, it's primarily planning and social planning. That they make up about half of that contribution, and then the Texada services have an increase of about $30,000, and that half of that's the airport, but those are all the services. So it's approximately a quarter because of Texada direct services, a little bit less than a quarter, a bit more than a quarter for shared services, and about half for regional services. So I think maybe that's what you're getting at. And I would, I'll presume to suggest that if you want to get those broken down by percentage, and I've shown this in my town hall for Liskedy of how does that look like for Texada. I'm sure I would expect Ms. Greenan would be able to help you with that. Get that broken out as percentages for Texada as opposed to percent changes per service, because I think that's what if I understand your question, I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the information about Texada. I was really thinking generally across the board, but thank you very much for that. That answers my questions.
Thanks. And I see Ms. Greenan also put her hand up again.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that summary. That was fantastic. But I just want to mention, yes, what you were talking about on page 35 of the agenda of this package. You will see the actual increases per service for electoral area D.
Okay, Director Gisborne, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, striking on the same note, Area B's is on page 33, and it breaks it down to what Area B's contribution is to each specific service. And I find it most helpful to go to the specific service to take a look at what the drivers are, what we can do in relation to get some of those drivers down or increase if we do want to spend more money. And I'm going to start with the first one on my list, which is on page 62, which is general administration, which is one of the main drivers. So I took a look through draft 1, 2, and 3, and I'm seeing the proposed driver is $150,000 for a FOIPA consultant, $185,000 for HR consultant, the endpoint detection and response software, which I presume is the security software, $67,883. Laserfish electronic records management system, 70,000, sorry, not 700,000. Change of phone system to TELUS Business Connect, 21,000. Office security and accessibility upgrades, 11,000. Flagpole, 10,000. HVAC system, 90,000, and a new backhoe at 215,000. So that's what I saw as the drivers from the other previous financial plans that we have before us. And getting into more specific line items, I got a couple of questions. So last year, consultants, we budgeted 136,000, but spent 176,000. And then proposed for 2025 is 439,000 for consultants. But it seems when I look at the budget on page, let me give the right page, 62, it looks like that budget amount for consultants is going to be the same next year and the year after that. So are these HR and FOIPA consultants planning on sticking around year over year for the next 5 years? Or is this a one-time thing?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, the 2026 to 2029 budgets are not zero-based. They are just based on the previous year's budgets. So we don't have all of the details fleshed out for the subsequent year's budgets.
Okay, so the 2026 is essentially just like a copy and paste of 2025.
Yes.
Okay, and another question I had, and this one kind of confuses me. We had a recent staff report about our public communication and legislative requirements for public notice. And it seemed the intent of the report was to reduce the cost of communications and advertising. But I'm looking at that same page 62, line 1268, communications and advertised. Last year we budgeted 65,000, but we spent 55,000. And then for this coming year, we're proposing to spend $108,000 on communications and advertising. So I'm just wondering, like, if we're looking at how to get those costs down in terms of, like, you know, not advertising in the peak and not advertising through those channels, which we're required to do for things like a new board procedure bylaw, then why is our communications and advertising budget for general administration essentially almost double of what we spent last year? Like, what's going on with that?
I see Ms. Chwende can answer that, I think.
Thank you through the chair. Yes, we're anticipating a larger budget due to some anticipated plans that may or may not happen with regards to voting and those sorts of things. So those costs are made so that we can pre-plan our legislative required advertising. For example, looking at the Lund water system, as well as costs related to board procedure updates, those sorts of things. So if the board did want to consider the alternative notice thing, which will be on the agenda this afternoon, those would be costs that we could look at. But again, estimates.
Well, as a follow-up, would communications and advertising related to the Lund sewer system not be allocated for the Lund sewer service? Because I noticed each service has their own line items for communications and advertising.
My apologies, for the Lund water, not Lund sewer.
Oh, yes,
which doesn't have a line item yet because it's not a regional district service.
Okay.
It's in the gray area still.
So I guess my other question is, a lot of our discussion and recommendations is about adjusting our prior year surplus and how that fits into our long-term reserves. But, you know, just adjusting the prior year surplus and adjusting our reserves doesn't really get us into addressing the drivers of tax increase, which comes down to our expenses. So how does our finance committee go about, you know, trimming things down? Like, do we specifically say cross out initiatives? Do we say, yes, cancel the $10,000 flagpole? Or do we just say, cut the budget by X amount and leave it up to staff to sort out? What's the best way for the finance committee to get some of these drivers into a more sustainable manner.
Well, I'll before handing it over to Ms. Green, and I would say I think initiatives, and I think first of all is timing. I think reviewing these, and we've talked about reviewing, service levels and so on. I think that focusing on initiatives is important because otherwise it's kind of hard to really be specific on it. And I think starting earlier in the process where we could actually go through and look at the implications. I think it's not impossible for the board just to say, reduce taxes by X dollars or X percent, but that doesn't really give staff direction of what to do. So I think we need to make those tough political choices if we want to do something. And I think the flagpole as an item is in there, and there are some initiatives like that. But I think other bigger initiatives, it should be focused on the initiative rather than just a dollar amount, because I don't think that that's just leaving the decision of what to cut to staff. But I'll let Ms. Greenan answer. Oh, something happened.
Oh. I can still hear you, Director Fall.
Okay,
Oh,
now
okay.
we can hear you. Sorry, it's an issue on our end.
Okay, so maybe I'll summarize what I said. I'll let Ms. Greenan answer.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think there are a few things that I think what the Finance Committee would need to do we would need to look at what services we're providing and where we wanted to pare down those services. That's the way to cut the budget. By just cutting the budget, that doesn't really give staff an indication of what services you want to cut. Let's see, for an example, just trying to find something in here. Okay, so for example, say if we just wanted to cut the budget, we might say, let's cut out the electronic record system. So that's good for this year. It would cut out that $70,000 cost. But what do we do in the future? Do we just, we just kick it down the road? So that's the question, is what services do you want to cut on a permanent basis, not just kicking them down the road? The other thing you could do is, if there are some costs that are one-time costs, you could look at, like in the general administration service, if we think that that would be a question for the general manager of administration services. If we think that the FOIPA consultant cost is not going to continue, then maybe that is something that could be funded. For example, just using that as an example, maybe that is something that could be funded from the general administration non-statutory reserve, because it's a one-time cost. And then, we could use the reserve to fund that because it won't be continuing next year. The only consideration we have is there aren't a lot of costs in this budget that we don't anticipate will be continuing.
Thank you for that. And just to summarize what I was saying earlier, which is consistent with that, I think the decision of what exactly to cut, if we want to reduce service levels, is up to us. We have to be able to face the public and say, we've chosen to save money, but we're taking this away. Like if we, just to use my own example, if we decided to reduce the regional park budget by a lot, that's not fair or appropriate to send that to staff, and staff come back and say, we're going to shut down, this park, because that's not really it's not fair to put that on them. It's for us to say, we choose to, if we want to save that, that's, we could ask staff for advice. It means shutting down a park, but which one? And then what do? We're not having that item or this item, and that's for us to take on. So we're making a clear link between how we allocate our taxpayers' dollars with the services we provide. So I think that's a deliberative process, and I think it's something that really should start earlier. We've talked about that in the past. I think really, I'm thinking like October, November, but I've got some other comments later on that. Director Gisborne, do you have other questions?
I have more, but I do see other folks have their hands up. And I would like to kind of keep my comments and questions related to specific services. And right now, my thoughts are still with general administration. I'll get into planning, waste management, and fire department services a little later, when other folks have had their chance to speak up around the table. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. And is there anyone else? I see Director McCormick. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken? And seeing no one, I'll hand it to Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I have a follow-up question to Ms. Greenan, because you mentioned the Texada Airport and you said there was $10,000 less in the prior year surplus, which contributed to the increase. But when I look at the actual budget, which is on page 133 of the report, it shows that the budgeted expenses for 2024 were 190, almost 95,000. Yet that was the budgeted, but the actual was 124,000, and which is considerably less. So I'm struggling to understand the lack of a prior year surplus. What am I not getting in this? Because that part doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, Ms. Greenan, maybe
Thank you,
can help
Chair.
clarify.
Okay, so what we do is we try to project early on in the budget, because the budget starts in December and usually ends in February. We try to project what the surplus is going to be. So we projected that the surplus would be $40,000 for the Texada airport. I'm just trying to find the actual exhibit here.
Shows the surplus as being 68,000.
So
The actual expenses in 2024 over the budget.
yes, so it looks like so based on the draft 3, we had budgeted in draft. When I put the budget together, I had projected that we would have a $40,000 surplus in the recreation service, whereas we projected a $50,000 surplus the year before. So I projected $10,000 less. So there is, now that we have the actual projected surpluses, I have updates again from March 11th, and Texada Airport looks like it's going to be at 57,891. So the board could make a motion to bring the entire Texada Airport surplus forward for use in 2025. And then that would reduce the budget by $17,891.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
When we
we'll
get to that point,
when we get there. So when we consider the other ones, that would be a possible one to consider. Okay, so are there any other questions before we get into Director Gismer? Do you want to ask your questions now, or do you want to do, if you have motions attached, we could do them when the motions come
Well,
up. But,
I believe the discussion is very beneficial to take a look at the individual services, so that we get a good understanding, and then based on the understanding, we can then put forward various motions to either cut things out or increase. I have planning and waste management, but I'm actually going to jump all the way down to MVFD. Because there's a lot of discussion around prior year surpluses and reserves that's been going around the table. And I think I can kind of clarify my understanding, because each service, in my opinion, is a little different. So, we don't really typically get a lot of prior year surpluses with, say, grant and aid, and it doesn't really make sense to put them into like a statutory reserve that, like for grant and aid. But for fire halls, it's been brought up that some years you have more calls and you have less calls, and the budget can kind of jump up and down. This brings me back to a discussion in 2018, 2019, which was when I first kind of got here. My concern quite often when dealing with, very autonomous departments, which is usually what volunteer fire departments are, is there's this attitude of, if we don't spend it this year, we won't get it next year. And I believe I pushed for an increase in a 25% increase to the tax requisition. And I went through the previous year's financial plans to take a look at the prior year surplus and where those went. So 2019, we contributed about $179,000 into the 3 types of reserves. One is for the fire hall, one's for apparatus like fire trucks, and one is non-statutory, which kind of is a lot more flexible. 2020, we contributed $123,000 into those various 3 reserves. 2021, it went up to $182,000. So you notice that contribution to the reserves, is high and then drops down in 2020, probably because something happened, and then it jumped back up again. So later on the agenda, we have, directing staff to, I believe, put $100,000 into the fire hall reserve. And I'd just like to point out that we've already been putting money into our reserves ever since 2019, because, for example, the apparatus reserve in 2019 was zero, and we didn't put anything into it in 2019. But in 2020, the lion's share of our prior year surplus went into fire department apparatus. And the idea with that is, let's try and stabilize that tax requisition increase. And if the folks out at the hall, you know, they turn the lights down when they go, or they don't have the heater blaring all the time, that can result in extra money getting put aside to go into our reserves. The alternative method that we as a board can do, not just with the fire department service, but all services, is to say, hey, if there's any reserve, we give it back to the taxpayers to try and keep the tax requisition down. We can do that. However, that then gives weight to the argument of, well, if we don't spend it this year, we won't get it next year. And I don't really like that method. I like to see more consistent tax increases closer to, you know, rate of inflation. And that's where we got to have those long-term plans. So for the MVFD, I'm very much in support of continuing with, if we don't spend it this year, it goes into reserve. Doesn't mean that, okay, you're not going to get it next year, because, you know, a lot of things can change. You might have a big storm season. There's a number of other things related to the MVFD that I'm not really going to get too far into. Where was it? Oh yes, here's one thing I did want to pull out. I noticed this when looking through some of our past years on the MVFD travel budget. Last year it was set at $100. I had to go back a few years, and what I saw was spent on travel was usually just over $1,000. This year the proposal is an $800 line item for travel. And when we get to motions, I know this might sound a little odd for me to say, but I would actually be willing to support a motion to increase the travel line in the budget to go from $800 to about $1,300, which is more of an alignment with the travel budget of what it was a number of years ago. Of course, that's a drop in the bucket of the over $1 million requisition. But I presume we would need a motion to make that clear, so that way MVFD folks that are looking to do some training, they have a bit of a travel budget. Is that correct? Would we need a motion to give that direction?
Ms. Green, I believe we would, but Ms. Greenan?
Thank you. I'd like to direct this question to the General Manager of Emergency Services, please.
Mr. Toms?
Yeah, if I could just maybe highlight in response through the chair. Typically what we budget in that travel is really looking for more sort of the clerical support or other travels sort of behind the scenes. And I think I heard Director Gisborne speak to firefighter training. We'll typically, anything that's supporting training, if it's travel, then we're going to put that to a training cost, because it's actually a part. We know where we live. We know that sometimes travel's involved. So just wanted to be clear there. If you're looking to support travel that happens in support of training, then really it's in a different GL. It's in that training.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies very significant, because when I was looking over the last several years' budget, I noticed that was a line item that, like, what we budget and then what was spent was kind of very inconsistent. And I know, in my opinion, I like to see budgets where what is actually being spent is below what's budgeted. So that's one of the reasons to bring up the MVFD and how we deal with our reserves. The other two services I would like to bring up, if that's okay with the Assembly.
If you have questions, because if we're getting into too much discussion, we can do that when we get to motions, but
okay.
Right now we're still doing questions.
My next question is on page 69 of our agenda. My computer's not doing what it's supposed to do. Here we go. Regional planning. Our tax requisition is, last year, $317,000. This year, we're proposing a 35% increase, and I believe we heard that a part of that is, you know, we've been using our reserves for the last several years. But then 2026 is $633,000. So it's not like a copy and paste of this year. There's a proposed 47% increase to the service next year. So I'm wondering what's the driving factor to essentially double the planning services requisition in a 2-year period?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. In the planning service, we rely on a lot of grants and then we try to use the prior year surplus or the non-stat reserve, which is funded by the prior year surplus for the most part. And so we have grants in the 2024 and 2025 budget we have $96,912 transferred from the housing initiatives, the balance of that grant, and 124,000 we're using from the non-stat reserve to shore up some of those projects. We haven't made good predictions for 2026 through 2029 on how much grant revenue we will be receiving. So that is why the requisition goes up until we figure out what kind of grant revenue or availability of non-stat reserves that we will have available to shore up those grants, to shore up that those projects.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that Director Gisborne, the total revenue and the total expenses actually are projected to go down. So 696,000 last year, 729,000 this year, and then in 2026, 714. So the actual, it's really just where that funding comes from. And so if we don't have reserves for the service, and if grants aren't easy to predict, well, something has to make up for it, and taxes are the flexible piece. But it's not, I guess it's a question mark there. Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Well, and then as a follow-up, I see that last year we spent $130,000 on salary and wages, and this year we're budgeting $210,000 for salary and wages, which represents roughly an $80,000 increase to the planning's services salary and wages. So I guess my question is, are we planning to hire another planner, or like why an $80,000 jump?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair.
What are we planning to do?
I'd like to direct that question to the General Manager of Planning Services, Laura Rodden.
Ms. Rodden, are you on the line?
Yes, I am here. Can you see me?
No.
Okay, I can't
Laura?
seem to get my
Through the
video.
Through the chair.
Yes.
Thank you. At the top of your laptop, there's a switch right above the camera.
Well, the little slider thing.
Oh yeah, I know it's showing that it's on. Anyways, I can answer the question quite easily. Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Ms. Greenan, at the beginning of her presentation, when this item of business began, mentioned that there had been some corrections made to the planning budget. So the numbers that are showing in the schedule for regional planning have not been adjusted to reflect those corrections. We did receive a sizable grant from the province in 2024 for housing capacity initiatives. And the version of the budget you're looking at deferred those monies. And so it's not showing, the numbers here are not the actual numbers of the budget, and it does affect the overall numbers. That being said, there is an increase to salary and wages. There's the 2.6% CPI increase. And in addition to that, the budget includes extending the contract for the second planner when Ms. Dykstra returns from her parental leave. So we have budgeted to keep Ms. Roberts on till the end of the year. And her job description at that point in time will be completely focused on coordinating the housing work that needs to get done by the end of 2025. So the grant projects and looking at the recommendations from the housing needs report. And that is not affecting the tax requisition. That is funded through the grant that we've received from the province. Thank you.
Okay, Director Gisborne.
Okay, so what that would mean then is for 2026, which is proposed $215,000, we can expect that value will drop down as we go from 3 planners down to 2. If what we're hearing is essentially the plan.
Ms. Rodden?
Yes, that is correct at this point in time.
Okay, and one last question for the planning. I noticed in our budget, consultants and other labor, $112,000 was budgeted, but we spent $182,000. Is that in relation to what you recently referred to in relation to like the 2 to 3 planners being kind of shuffled around, or is that something different?
Ms. Rodden?
Through the chair, no, that is a separate line item specifically for consultants. And here again, the grant is offsetting some of those costs, anything that's housing related. For instance, the contract we had to prepare the interim housing needs report was off, the cost of that was offset by the grant, and work that we have planned for 2025 will be offset by the grant. And then there were some increases, consulting costs related to the area or to the Savory Island OCP update based on public concerns and the board's desire to see a higher level of engagement for that OCP. And so that affected consultants' time towards that project.
Thank you. That's very enlightening. And that actually comes to the end of any of my questions related to the planning service. And I have one more, which is the waste management service, which I know is a big one.
Might as well get it done. Go ahead.
Okay. So let me make sure I get onto the right page, which is page 98 of our report. I just want to make sure we all get the right page. So this year we're looking at a 9% requisition increase, and this is, last year we had an 86% increase. However, next year's proposal is a 14% increase. And good news is our tipping fees came in last year at about $300,000 over budget, which means that we got more money coming in. I do believe that in our December meeting, we agreed to a new contract with Republic Services in Washington State to deal with our garbage. And I believe it was a 15% increase. Now, last year, we increased our tipping fees to reflect the cost of disposal. Now, to do the same thing this year, would it need to be another 15% increase or more or less? Because, of course, the tipping fees for Republic are not the full cost associated with us shipping out our waste. And is there like an upcoming staff report? I see we got Jason Cohenhoven already, because I think that question is more directed to our manager of environmental services.
Mr. Cohenhoven.
Thank you, through the chair. There is a report coming forward with updated tipping fees. I don't have those exact numbers off the top of my head, but as Director Gisborne has stated, the 15% contract increase is not the full cost of that service. So there are several other factors to discuss when we get to that tipping fee amount.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm happy to hear that that's coming forward, because as we can see in our financial plan, we collected over $2 million in tipping fees last year alone, and that helps offset the significant cost of our solid waste management service. The other item is down in page 100, and this has to do with our organics program. I see it says $125,000 for organics transport and $140,000 for organics disposal. I presume the transport is what it costs for us to transport it to Salish Soils, and the cost of disposal is for Salish Soils to take it off our hands. Is that a correct assumption?
Mr. Cohenhoven?
Through the chair, that is correct, yes.
Okay, and at a recent meeting, I recall that we were informed that roughly 90% of the material is classified as yard waste. Is that still the case?
Mr. Cohenhoven?
Thank you, through the chair. So Yes, in general, that is the case. There is just a couple of different ways of looking at that, which is by volume, the actual size of the material, and then by weight, which is tends to be heavier for food waste and light and fluffy for the yard waste. So what we are seeing mostly is a pretty good mix, and the curbside material that comes from the City of Powell River's collection program is a majority of it is yard waste.
Okay. I guess that if I keep talking about this item, I might actually be getting into my notice of motion for the board meeting, which I think is later on today, in relation to introducing some kind of tipping fee for cost recovery associated with yard waste that's going into our organics program. But as you probably know, a lot of the rural folks don't really take our lawn clippings to the Resource Recovery Center. Rural urban difference. Those are the main ones for me for the moment. Thank you, Chair, and I'll.
Okay, thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any other questions before we move on? I see Director Elliott, and then hopefully we can start making some motions. Director Lennox. Director Elliott, and then Director Lennox.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to, for my own clarity and for the public watching, if we are to increase our borrowing by 2.5 million to cover the waste management costs needed to finish the project, and does that reflect any kind of increase to the overall requisition for waste management above the 103,684 for this increase that we've already got for the city?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. No, there won't be any changes to the budget because staff, we had already incorporated the $2.5 million debt at a 25-year amortization period.
And then a follow-up question is part of the increase in waste management budget overall because of the debt coming on board this year?
Yes, it is. Yes, because the debt is going to be something the two together here. Oh, $127,432 more than it was was budgeted in 2024.
Thank you.
Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just quick, and I've been scrolling back and between screens, so hopefully Ms. Greenan can help me out. I noticed yesterday when I was reading the agenda that for North Side, there's actually 2 transfer to reserve buckets. I think one was operating and another one was capital. I can't remember. I don't have it in front of me. Maybe you could explain the history of why we had 2 buckets there for transfer to 2 different non-stat reserves.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. No, for Northside, we only have the one. There's just the one transfer to reserve for, there's just a statutory reserve in the Northside Volunteer Fire Service.
Thanks. I must have made a mistake. Thanks.
Okay, looks good. So I think we can now move on to the items 1 to 5. There's 6 items in the agenda on the cover and in the schedule, but we'll deal with items 1 to 5, 4 of which were referred from the last board meeting, and 1 was submitted by Director Brander. And then we'll look at the other items that may come up, and we'll conclude with item 6 in the agenda because that's the kind of completion item. So for item 1, I have a motion I'd like to propose or put forth, which is related to LIVFD, and I've provided the wording for the corporate officer, which is to basically adjust the amount we'd made put forward from the February 26th meeting to just say whatever's left over, wherever the chips fall, put the surplus into the budget, so that the committee recommends that the board directs staff to place all unallocated 2024 surplus into the 2025 budget for the Skeety Volunteer Fire. If I see a seconder. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Director Lennox. And I'll speak very briefly to this. The reason I worded it this way was we got into obviously a little bit of an issue putting forth numbers before the budgets were finalized. This provides flexibility. If there's any last minute changes to the budget, this will, that can be accommodated, and whatever's left over will show up into the budget. And then next year we'll continue our discussions about what appropriate amounts going into the reserves is. Okay, so that's the item. Is there any, Director Gisborne?
Yes, I've seen this motion pop up a few times, and it gets me a little confused where it goes, we're going to put our surpluses into the budget, and I go, well, I think they're already in the budget. Is the intent of the motion to offset the tax requisition and just, use the surplus to, decrease the tax burden? Is that my correct understanding?
Yes, and I'll let Ms. Greenan explain it, but I'll give you my layperson's explanation, is that by putting it in the budget means it shows up in the 2025 column as revenue, thereby offsetting taxes, as opposed to the 2024 budget, which would move it into reserves so that there are no surpluses, because that's what you're basically finalizing. Putting it in reserves is basically saying using this, increasing the transfer to reserve in 2024's budget so that there are no reserves. So the reserves are zero going forward. So that's, I think, the difference. But Ms. Greenan can explain it much better than I can, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chair. No, that was a good explanation. Just what happens is like we were talking about before, because we can't rely on surpluses. So what we're trying to do is instead of putting them forward for use in the subsequent year, we would just transfer them to that services reserve. So they would never leave that service, but they're sitting in the reserve rather than being used in the subsequent year to reduce the requisition.
Does that address your question, Director Gisborne?
Yes. So now when I'm taking a look at the financial plan, so the statutory reserve column, rather than saying transfers from operating, that line would just become zero. So we're not transferring the surplus from operating into the reserve. It's just going back to the taxpayers.
Right, and we've already allocated, I think, 60,000. So there'll still be a certain amount going into the reserve. This would just take the unallocated reserve, which shows up often as a little number down at the bottom. That would just, cause that to be recorded as surplus, and then surplus revenue for 2025. Ms. Greenan, is there clarification on that you might want to add?
Thank you, Chair. I could just add, like, if you look at so we were talking about the surplus. So if you look at page 117 of the agenda, you will see at the bottom of the Lasqueti Volunteer Fire Service, there is that projected surplus of 186,044. So now we know that's closer to 149,092. So generally what we would do is we would take that and put that 149,042 or 092 into the statutory reserve. So it would make that reserve bigger. But in this case, it won't. So it won't be an additional contribution to the reserve. It'll just go forward and reduce the subsequent year's tax requisition.
Clarify. Okay, so is there any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? That carried. Okay, so item 2, which was referred from our February 26th meeting, Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I won't belabor it with another round of explanation. Same intent, and I appreciate staff and the process to get to the true numbers. I think there's actually, it's reflected in the report as well, a recommendation to reduce to 30,000 for Northside, and we'll talk about number 3 in a second.
Right.
So that's my motion.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Director McCormick. So the intent is basically make the same wording changes rather than a fixed 90,000, which isn't there. It'll say basically all of it, whatever's left over, will go into the budget.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay. You're welcome. Is there any discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. It carries unanimously. Okay. Item 3, Director Lennox.
I'll say ditto, same intent, but it's a different amount. So as per the report, I think it was 40,000.
Right. So this one's for
I move that.
Savory Island. So that's moved. Is there a seconder for that? Corporate officer?
I see.
Yeah, Director
Corporate
McCormick.
officer.
Yeah, corporate
Clarity.
officer.
Are we doing unallocated amounts or are we doing a specific dollar amount, 40,000?
Yeah, specific.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So seconded by Director McCormick. Any discussion on that?
No need.
Seeing none, no need. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, so that we also have item 4 for the Malaspina. So that's referred to from the February. Director Brander?
Move the recommendation.
Okay, so the recommendation is moved.
Second.
By Director Lennox. And the recommendation is as in, right, so that's as written in, as was considered in the February 26th. Is that still okay? Okay, so Director Gisborne's discussion.
Yeah, when I read the motion that the committee recommends to the board that the board directs staff to increase the Malaspina Fire Protection Service annual contribution to the statutory reserve fund number 1 from $29,412 to $100,000 per year to contribute additional funds towards fire hall replacement. So when I read this motion, what it's saying is every year we're going to put $100,000 into the statutory reserve fund number 1 for the purpose of a fire hall replacement. That's how I read this motion. Now, as I pointed out previously, we have been contributing the prior year surpluses into our 3 reserves. One's the fire hall, one's the apparatus, and one is non-statutory. When I read this, it makes me like, what's the plan then for the other surplus? Are we going to still put that into the reserve, or are we going to give the surplus back to the taxpayer, which means that we're going to no longer have a stable increase for the fire department? Not saying that we currently have one, but
Well, the short answer to your question is that there's a item 5 following this that would deal with the rest of the surplus, and that was submitted by Director Brander, and that's not on the table, of course, but that would still leave the unallocated surplus as something to resolve. Director Brander?
Thank you, Chair. I see this as giving us a stable contribution to the fire hall reserve. And I felt that the $29,412 that was previously earmarked for this reserve fund was inadequate. So I would like to see it brought up to $100,000.
and is that for every year?
Through the chair. It's my understanding this is how it will continue from here on, but of course every budget is looked at on an individual basis each year.
And I'll add to that too, that it the way it's worded, it probably would suggest that it would show up as part of the 5-year plan, but every year is its own year. So the board is free to change it next year or 2027 or in the future to the level that it wishes, higher or lower. Director Gisborne?
Well, in that case, I'm actually opposed to this motion, and for a variety of reasons. One, we have 3 different reserves that we can put money into. One's fire hall, one's apparatus, and one is non-statutory. As I understand, apparatus must be replaced within a specific time, 20 to 25 years, based on the age and condition of the truck. Fire halls, we are not, as I understand it by the fire underwriters, required to replace fire halls. And I know that those are political, controversial decisions and discussions whenever community looks at a fire hall replacement. We can look at the city of Powell River in the last election as an example. And I believe that there is enough money in fire hall reserve currently, which is over 350,000. I believe it's what, 386? Oh no, wait. Last year's 363. I'll just go with that. It seems a little safer to say. And replace something like the deck or a septic field, which I believe would come out of the statutory reserve. I think that's fine. I think we've got enough money in there. We're looking at getting close to $450,000, I believe, or we already are at $450,000 for apparatus. A new fire truck is a lot more than that. I would much rather see the reserves, the contribution to reserves be to non-statutory number 2, because we are going to have to spend that money. I believe within the next 5 to 10 years, there needs to be a new truck out there. And as a result, I don't feel comfortable with that kind of money going to a new fire hall when we haven't picked out a location. We're still doing a service review. And does the community actually want to pay for a new fire hall at this time? Because it's a lot of money to be putting aside for a fire hall when we need trucks.
Director Brander?
I see Ms. Greenan's hand up, and I'll go.
Ms. Greenan, sorry, I missed you there.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, just the board to keep in mind that now that the Community Works funds, that we've decided not to contribute those Community Works funds to the Resource Recovery Center, we do have those funds available now. And they do have a 5-year rolling 5-year time limit to spend them. So, and fire trucks is a perfect way to use them, you know, and they could be used in each, basically in area A, B, C, and E for fire trucks, and those are a rolling need. So that's something to consider for apparatus.
Thank you for that, Director Brander.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Ms. Greenan did take part of my comments, but I'm going to reiterate them. When I looked at the reserves, there were recommendations to increase both reserves or both contributions to fire halls and to fire trucks. I felt that the contribution to the fire halls, to the fire trucks or apparatus at this point was adequate. And as Ms. Greenan mentioned, Community Works funds can go for fire trucks. And historically, if you look back on the way Community Works funds have been used, Area C has gotten almost zero benefit from them. So it is my expectation, or my hope, I should say, that when the MVFD is needing a new apparatus, that some of those Community Works funds would be allocated towards it. So that's why I suggested that we increase the fire hall reserve. 100,000 still isn't a lot, so it's going to take a long time to build up any amount of money for a fire hall replacement or even a major renovation. And I didn't see the point in increasing the amount for fire trucks when I think there is another funding source for it. Thank you.
Okay, one more kick at the can. Director Gisborne, it'd be nice to get a vote on this so we can...
Thank you, Chair. I only need one more kick at the can. And thanks to Ms. Greenan for pointing out the Community Works funds, which I know we talked about extensively earlier on. I do believe we can also use Community Works funds for fire halls as well. I believe that was also in the announcement. So hearing that, I think the best way to go is to take the prior year surplus, put it into the 3 reserves in a combination, which is what we've been doing since 2019. And I don't think we need to earmark $100,000 every year just for the fire hall replacement, which might be 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But we're going to be sitting with the taxpayers' money, just holding on to it. And I don't want us to turn into a dragon, I think is the term that's used. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, you're welcome. Director Elliott.
I wonder when it comes to the vote at the regional district, who participates in that vote? That's one question. And then my second point about the rolling nature of the Community Works Fund is that fire halls will have a less percentage available of the Community Works Fund because it does have to go every 5 years than apparatus, simply because the difference in the overall amounts. And if your apparatus reserve is already quite high and your building fund is quite low, you won't get to where you have the right amount of funding for a fire hall. Speaking over at the city, we are struggling to figure out how to get a fire hall. And anything you can do to plan for that is definitely going to benefit your area in the long run. So
thank you. So yeah, corporate officer, could you clarify the voting structure, which when this gets to the board?
Thank you. I may have to examine it a little bit more. Typically, when we are talking about funding the budget, it is an all weighted vote, but there are certain occasions when it is a participant, so area B and C weighted vote. And I would need to examine legislation. I guess, before I would be prepared to tell you.
Okay, so we'll find out before this comes to the board, and then we'll know. Okay, is there any further discussion on this item? Was there a question there, Director Elliott? In the second part of your, or was that just a comment?
I think I was just commenting on the nature of the proportion attention required for a fire hall versus the apparatus and the benefits of those community works for each of those things. And that I was in favor of probably increasing your planning for a fire hall over and because your apparatus already gets a considerable amount of money.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss a question. So I don't see any other hands up for discussion. So on this item, which is as in the agenda, item 4, sub-item 4, I will call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? One opposed, Director Gisborne. It carries. Okay, so we're on to sub-item 5, which was submitted by Director Brander and relates to the surplus. Director Brander?
I'll move the recommendation.
Is there a seconder for that? Director Lennox? Discussion on this. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I just saw this as an opportunity, like yourself did, and Director Lennox, to reduce the requisition for community this year. I am generally in favor of increasing reserves, but as we already increased one from 29,000 to 100,000, and because of other increases, I felt this was reasonable to put the money back into the service versus putting it into a reserve. I'm not saying that I will be in favor of this every year, but I thought this year.
And in this case, it's very specific with the dates, so it's not ongoing. So another, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I believe I've mentioned this. So 2019, we contributed prior year surplus $179,000 into reserve. That was, $102,000 to the fire hall, $76,000 to non-statutory. 2020, we contributed $123,000 of prior year surplus into the reserves. 2021, it was $182,000 into the reserves from prior year surplus. 2022, it then dropped down to 153 was the prior year surplus going into the reserve. 2023 was $145,000 prior year surplus going into reserve. 2024, I believe we took the prior years, which was $139,000, and had that go into reserve. And now this year, we're only looking at about $45,000 as the prior year surplus. And we're saying, okay, let's not put that into the reserve, but we've just decided let's put $100,000 as a solid amount into the reserve. Makes me think about, why does the reserve exist at the planning service? To try and stabilize the tax requisition. So it seems like what we're doing with the fire hall is doing the opposite. So next year, it might be a large increase, there might be a small increase, but we're still going to be essentially earmarked $100,000 for a fire hall. I preferred the system that we've been doing since 2019, which is, hey, if we save money, that goes into the apparatus and a new fire hall, and it encourages the department to think of, hey, if you don't spend it, we're not going to claw it back. That's actually what we're doing, is we're saying, hey, if you don't spend it, we're going to claw it back. So I was happy to go along with the other directors that wanted to go that method with their fire departments. But as a participant in the Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department service, I don't want to give that signal. I prefer to reward it when they say, hey, we found a way to save money.
Okay, thank you. And maybe I'll convert that to a question for Ms. Green. And could you review for us for Malaspina? Because there are 3 separate transfers to reserves, I see, and if we've just passed a recommendation, so if that, if the board accepted that recommendation, if this one passed, what would be the actual transfers to reserve that would be going in the 2025 budget?
All right, Director Fall, Chair Fall.
Yes.
Ms. Greenan's muted.
Oh, Ms. Green, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, I just realized that too. Thank you. I just wanted to first review one thing. So in 2023, the surplus for the Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department was sorry, I don't have the right sheet here. But yes, let's review budget here. So in 2024, the plan is to put $100,000 into the fire hall reserve, 110,620, that includes interest, into the fire hall or the apparatus reserve, and 23,073, including interest, into the equipment and major maintenance reserve. That's all planned. That's not from surplus. Sorry, Chair, was that your question?
That's the question. So in essence, what I would cast again in my more lay way of putting at it, that was planned. So but it would be surplus if we weren't doing that. So in other words, other than reserves, the amount that's planned to go into reserves at this point is approximately 233,000. 100 for the hall, 100 for apparatus reserve, and 23 or 110 for apparatus and 23 for major equipment. And so then if this recommendation passed, that would give the remaining surplus, which would be 45,000, back to the taxpayer. So that's what we're contemplating. So is there any further discussion on this motion that's on the table? Okay, seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Director Gisborne. It carries. Okay, so before we get on to item 6, let's see what I had prepared here. So before addressing item 6, we should consider the items on pages 20 to 24 in the staff report, and then any other proposed changes for the plan. So maybe we should first look through those ones, starting in this section called for consideration. And Ms. Greenan has kindly put a number of options for us to consider, and I'm sure there will be questions as we go. But the first one in that section is on general administration, and that's to deal with the changes in the surplus, the fact that there's less surplus than was planned for in the last draft. And staff is looking for a motion to clarify what exactly we're doing with that. Director McCormick?
Thank you. I'm happy to move the recommendation. There's two part with an and then a third, and I'm okay to move those. But I also wanted to add another motion for changes to draft 3, and that is the reduction in the Texada Airport budget.
Yes, so we won't let that drop off the table. So if there's a motion Okay, thank you. For the first two, which are joined by an and, so this is to direct staff to reduce the surplus for the general administration from 334,000 to 240, and then to allocate 100,000 from the non-statutory reserve to make up that difference, more or less. So that's what's just been moved. Is there a seconder for that? I'll second it. Director Lennox can second it. Is there discussion on that item? Seeing none, then I will call Director Gisborne. Go ahead.
Yeah, the motion before us is that the prior year surplus reduced from $334,000 to $240,000 because, as we've been informed by our staff, the prior year surplus reflects that. We don't have as much money as we hoped, so we're looking at we need another roughly $94,000. That's why the second part of the motion, which is followed by the and, is to take $100,000 from the non-stat reserve in 2025 general administration budget. We could do that, but then that just deprives us of our reserves in the future. And I'm wondering if maybe we can take a look through some of our expenses and maybe cut some other things out, and then we don't need to pull from the reserves.
Is there any other discussion on this? This is the motion that's on the table. Okay, seeing none, I will call the question then. All those in favor of the motion? In favor, all those opposed? Director Gisborne's opposed. That motion carries. Okay, so there's the next item in that section is related to the flagpole, and Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I'll move that the board directs staff, the committee recommend to the board that the board directs staff to remove the $10,000 budgeted general administration service for a flagpole from the budget.
Is there a seconder for that, Director Lennox? Okay, discussion on removing entirely. So that's not taking the suggestion to move it to capital, but to remove it. Director Brander?
I would just like to, thank you, Chair. I'd like to question staff as to the purpose of the flagpole.
So which staff would have the right answer for that? Corporate officer? Do you know who would be corporate
Thank
officer?
you, Mr. Monday, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Monday, maybe you could explain to us the need for the flagpole and if it would be a problem to, at a minimum, postpone it?
Yes, thank you through the chair. So the intention of the flagpole was to allow the organization to be more seen. We currently don't have a flagpole at the main offices. So we are unable to participate in things like flag raisings, celebrating or commemorating the loss of staff members or elected officials, or participating in events such as Truth and Reconciliation Days. So that was the original intent behind the flagpole. We had had some preliminary conversations based on discussion at this table about the cost for the flagpole, and we could potentially do the project with a lesser budget if we were to remove where we were originally planning on putting the flagpole. So it could be done. I would probably say we could cut that budget in half too, if there was still desire to move forward with it.
Okay, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, based on the information from our staff, I kind of thought I knew what the purpose of a flagpole was. And my thoughts is if we do pay for a flagpole, then we're going to need to get a policy about what kind of flags are put on the flagpole. We're going to need to make sure that we have staff that can go and raise the flags and put the flags at the appropriate height based on what activities are going on. And so I'm looking at this line item that, $10,000, we might be able to get it down to $5,000, but there's going to be more costs as the years go by if we go down this road and approve this flagpole. So my stance right now is the tax increases are pretty big. I don't think we need to spend more money on something that is literally symbolic.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there any further discussion? Director McCormick?
Thank you. It's my understanding that this recommendation would actually reduce our budget by removing it from operations to capital. Is that correct?
Well, the recommendation would have, but that's not the motion on the table. The motion on the table is to remove the item entirely and not put in a flagpole in 2025. That was the motion that was put forward by Director Gisborne and seconded.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Lennox?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And respectfully, I'm going to vote against this motion. I do feel it's important to fly the flag. And there's many occasions that is quite appropriate for local governments. And I also appreciate the attempt to reduce the cost. Half would be much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item? Okay, seeing none then. So that motion, Director Southcott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question further to Mr. Monday. If the budget was dropped to half of the original 10,000, what would the product look like? Would it still be adequate to serve the intended purpose?
Mr. Monday?
Yes, thank you through the chair. We believe that reduction would still allow us to have the original intent.
Okay.
Carry on. Yeah.
Follow-up amendment to do just that, drop the budget to 5,000 instead of.
We can't. Sorry, I see the corporate officer. We can't because the motion on the table is actually to remove it entirely. So to not do it. So what if directors that would like to do that, then it would be more appropriate to vote against the motion. If this motion fails, then an alternate motion or subsequent motion could be put forward, but we can't change the intent of this motion on the table, which is to not do it at all. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I just want to remind the Assembly that what we've heard is if we decide to vote this motion down, then what we're most likely going to do is then say, okay, we'll approve the approval of the flagpole for $10,000, but then we're also approving additional administration costs to deal with and operate the flagpole. As is quite often mentioned, you know, the cost to build something is only a fraction of the actual cost. The cost to operate it is another one. And I'll, you know, reference something my mom used to always say as a federal customs agent. You know, when the government wants to do something, they would run it up the flagpole to see who salutes. Well, looks like we're potentially going to get our own flagpole. See if anyone salutes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on this? So the motion on the table, I'm going to call the question to be clear, is to take this out entirely from the 2025 budget and remove it. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed? I'll be opposed to it. Does not carry. I won't list them all. Director Gisborne's in favor. Everyone else is opposed. Okay, is there any other motion anyone would like to make? Director Gisborne? Oh, corporate officer?
Oh, sorry, Chair. We do have, since the update of Windows 11, we have our microphone loses audio every once in a while. So if you see me raise my hand like that, I'm trying to get you to stop so that we can get your audio back on. Thank you.
Yeah. And I had to, my headset ran out of juice, so I had to go back to my lousy mic too. So apologies for my voice being off and on. So that did not carry. Everyone was opposed except for Director Gisborne. So is there a subsequent motion anyone would like to make related to the flagpole? Director McCormick?
Sure.
Director Lennox too.
That $5,000 be budgeted in the capital plan.
Okay, so that as written in the agenda, the committee recommend to the board that the board direct staff to move $5,000 to the, actually, corporate officer, what would be appropriate wording for this? Because this is kind of a moving as opposed to 5,000. So I get the intent. The intent is to have 5,000 capital plan money.
Thank you. I would just suggest that that we reduce the budget to 5,000 and move it to the capital 2025 capital plan.
Okay, is that what you wanted, Director McCormick? Okay, is there a seconder for that?
Thank you.
Director Lennox, that's good. Is there any discussion on this item? Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I got a question. From the staff report, it says as a capital cost, there would not be a current year tax impact as it would be funded through the general administration non-statutory reserve. So as I understand this motion is that we're going to use the money from the non-statutory reserve to pay for this project. Is that correct?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if it's in capital, then the non-statutory reserve would be, the general administration non-statutory reserve would be used to pay for it.
Okay, and I believe the source of the non-statutory reserve is prior year's taxation.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll speak to this. I'm in favor of this. I think, given a lot of things going around in our current context, I think it's a good idea for us to have a flagpole. I don't see the cost being very high, at least to put up our national flag. And if there's other costs or policies as raised by Director Gisborne, I think we do need to deal with those. We might need to have a policy. But I think for a start, the simplest is just to have a flagpole with a flag on it. And I appreciate the work by staff to cut the budget down. I think it's feasible. Okay, is there any other discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? I'm in favor. All those opposed? Okay, Director Gisborne and Director Southcott are opposed, but it carries. Okay. On to the next item, which is planning. And this one, I must say, was a little confusing for me, and I'm not in the planning service, so maybe I should hand it over to Ms. Greenan to explain the options. There seem to be two options at least here, and
Thank you, Chair. Yes, when I was going through the financial statements and projecting the prior years, like the surplus for 2024, we made an error because there was the housing needs assessment grant was received, and we transferred that to the reserve because it was going to be used in the subsequent year, but then we realized it had to be deferred, so we did both. We deferred it and transferred it, which means that we underestimated our surplus. So now the surplus is projected at, the actual surplus, is projected at, for the planning service, at $133,695. So there's no need to readjust the budget. We could go forward with the budget the way it was. We were going to put that money into put the surplus for 2024 into the reserve, and then use funding from the reserve to pay for some of the extraordinary projects that are happening in 2025. So there is no need to consider either of these options. The one thing, though, to consider is that the planning manager did find a couple of cost savings. So I would like the board to consider, we'd ask the board if you would put forward a motion that the committee recommend to the board that the board direct staff to implement the cost savings identified by the general manager of planning services into draft 4 of the budget.
What's not to like about that? So maybe I'll ask Ms. Rodden to explain those, and hopefully someone is willing to contemplate such a motion, because if I was in the service, I'd be putting that forward. Ms. Rodden?
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask for clarification from Ms. Green, and so that was pertaining to the amount that was showing for communications and engagement.
Yes. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So just to clarify, that amount of $6,540. Yeah, $6,540 is redundant. I had already budgeted under a different line item further down, 1205, 1268. I've already budgeted 17,000 for engagement in 2025, and so it wasn't necessary to have the $6,000+ there. It can be removed.
That's great. So is someone interested in making such a motion, which was Director Lennox, seconded? Is there a seconder? Director McCormick. So the motion, as I understand, is to direct staff to implement the cost savings identified by staff for the planning service, something like that. Is there any discussion on this? Seeing none, Director McCormick.
Just to thank staff for their work in coming up with that saving. Every bit of saving is good news.
Yep, it's all good.
So just a clarification.
Go ahead.
So that's not option 1 or option 2 in our report?
So what manager of financial service? It's a separate thing. So the option 1 and option 2 are no longer needed because the surplus was bigger than planned. So we don't need to do anything unless someone wants to, but I don't see, hopefully we don't need to. But this is an additional change, minor adjustment to the budget to basically reduce the expenses by $6,500 based on those cost savings. Okay, so I will, seeing no other hands up, I will call the question on this. All those in favor? None opposed, carried unanimously. Okay, so regional emergency services, I think it says there's no motion is necessary. There's some item there, but we don't need to do anything there. But Myrtle Pond, there's a recommendation, Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I move that the committee recommend to the board that the board direct staff to reduce the 2025 budgeted use of the prior year surplus in the Myrtle Pond service from $30,000 to $29,783.
170. Okay, seconded by Director Lennox. Is there any discussion on this adjustment? Seeing none, I will call. Sorry, go ahead, Director Gisborne. Did you have it?
It almost seems like the motion would cost more than the cost difference.
Yeah, it's just get everything. We need to get down to the dollar here. Okay, so Director Elliott.
So this must be based on an actual calculation of the surplus, and that $217 is short of the total that was moved in a previous meeting. Is that why we have this?
Yes, Ms. Greenan, I believe that's the case. Ms. Greenan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we planned what happens in the water and the sewer services is we have a large operating contingency, and the reason for that is it's in case there is a large repair or maintenance required in the year. So in the Myrtle Pond Water Service, we have a $30,000 operating contingency. And so it's expected that that actually won't get spent during the year so that we can bring it forward for the subsequent year. And that was what the plan was, but we actually spent $217 of that.
Okay, so we're clear on this item, Director Gisborne?
Oh, I was going to just wait until we vote, and then I was going to ask for a 5-minute bio break.
Oh, very good idea. Okay, let's vote on this. I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carried unanimously. We have a request to, for physical well-being, so we will take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 3:15.
started, then we're good to go, Chair.
Okay, looks like we're back from our break and we're good to go. Recording has started. So we just dealt with the Myrtle
Recording
Pond
in
water.
progress.
Oh, now it's. I just heard the voice again. So the recording has started and we're back in session. So we just dealt with the Myrtle Pond water. Fire services we've already dealt with. So unless I'm missing something, I don't believe there's anything more we need to deal with there. And the sub-regional recreation services item 6.3 on our agenda, so we don't need to deal with that here. So that leaves us with other items that aren't in the staff recommendations, and I'll hand it over to Director McCormick because she has something for Texada Airport, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would move that the Texada Airport budget be reduced by $17,000 from the unallocated surplus from 2024.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Director Gisborne or Lennox, whoever's hands up was first. We'll say Director Gisborne, I saw him first. So that's, is that clear, Corporate Officer, what the motion is there? We had to explain. Director McCormick, did you have comments for that?
No, just to say this, that there is sufficient excess surplus from 2024. We're allocating 50,000 for this year, but there's 67,000. So it just helps to bring down the airport operating budget by that little bit.
Very good. Any further, Corporate Officer?
Sorry, I missed the full amount.
17,000.
Oh, I did not miss the full amount.
It was the full amount. Okay, so we're good on this. Then seeing no other hands up, I will call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, so are there any other motions that we want to make at this time? Otherwise, if not, then we're back to item 6. So if there's anything else, I don't see any other hands up. So item 6, Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn. I had a few items that I was kind of proposing to bring before the Assembly to potentially cut, such as consulting fees and maybe the HVAC system. But after the discussion around the flagpole, I'm not sure if there's much appetite with the Assembly. So let's go on to the next item.
Okay, so item 6 on the agenda, which is basically an update from what we had last month from staff, is that we direct staff to, so this is a recommendation if someone would like to make it, but the recommendation is to direct staff to allocate any surplus from last year, not scheduled, so not with a vote, to be brought forward, that are not scheduled to be brought forward to support 2025 budgets to the most appropriate reserve fund. In other words, taking any surplus that wasn't otherwise directed forward to 2025 to put that into reserves, and that any changes directed at this meeting be brought forward to the financial plan bylaw and brought before the March 26th board meeting. So is someone interested in making that recommendation, or Director Brander? Director McCormick, is there, very good, is there discussion on that motion? Is it clear? I did have something I wanted to say on it, which is, I'll speak. I see Director Gisborne, but you're too slow with your hand, so I'll speak. So I first want to thank all staff, in particular financial services staff, as well as the committee, for all of the work getting us close to completing the 2025 budget. It's never an easy task. I also want to plant a seed of thought for the committee, as our communities will be facing very significant threats to our country from the U.S. The tariffs and trade war initiated by the U.S. and the surrounding economic uncertainty and chaos may cause significant harm and hardship within our region, with potential at least for reduced job prospects combined with increased prices. I believe that we need to prepare ourselves for a very different cycle next year that is based in large part on maintaining services while avoiding tax increases. This implies that we, as a committee, should keep in check anything we put forward as proposals that would increase staff workload and tax needs. Depending on what happens over the course of 2025, we may need to engage in some challenging discussions around this table starting next autumn. Elbows up. But for now, let's focus on what is directly in front of us and put a wrap on the 2025 budget. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, the motion that's before us is in relation to taking the prior year surpluses and putting them into the appropriate reserves. That's a motion that I would gladly support for our fire departments. But for all other services, I'm not entirely convinced that that's the best way forward. In relation to our economic woes, especially with what's going on south of the border, I'd like to remind everyone around the table that we're currently paying the Americans a significant amount of money to ship our garbage to them. And yes, the Americans are proposing tariffs on us, but the Chinese just put 100% tariff on our agricultural products. As a pig farmer, that's something that I think we should raise an eyebrow at. We are getting hit with tariffs, and we're getting hit with tariffs from south of the border, from east of us, and I think it's going to just be a general trend around the world. And we do need to make these tough decisions, and we do need to consider which services we're willing to pay for, which services we're willing to cut, and what's a want and what's a need. But I've got some thoughts on where we can start saving some money, but really comes up to the assembly. And I guess this is going to be a further discussion over the next couple of months and all the way into the fall. But thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
But I do not support this motion.
Okay, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I really enjoyed your comments, and I think when we budgeted money and it lands in a surplus because we didn't just quite get everything done we wanted to do, the appropriate reserve is the best way to prevent increases in the future. It's the best way to run ahead. In favor of the motion. I'm in favor in general of putting anything that we didn't accomplish in the year that we plan to do it into reserves. Generally, when we have surplus, it's because we either had slightly less of something that we based on an average, and that's usually going to mean that we're going to have slightly more at some other time, and it's nearly impossible to hit the exact right amount. Good planning suggests that we would plan for the average and put into reserves that which may be a lower year, so that when we do run into that higher year that causes the valleys and the humps, that we haven't gone away with those funds. It's good practice. It's also insulates all taxpayers from unexpected increases in the future. And I'm in favor of the motion. In comment to the waste that currently leaves our country and gets dealt with south of the border, we definitely need a new plan for that. We're not going to solve that here today. So I'm in favor of this motion and getting our budget before us.
Thank you. Is there any other comments around the table? Okay, seeing none, I will then call the question. All those in favor? I'm in favor. Opposed? Director Gisborne's opposed. It carries. Okay, congratulations. We've done the budget. At least it's going to the board and we can talk more about it there. We're on to item 6.3 in our agenda, which is related to the recreation service and correspondence from Mayor Woznow from the city of Powell River regarding the contribution referred to. And there's a staff recommendation in the report. We've had discussions on this, and we know there's a service review going on, but this is about how much primarily the participants will choose to reserve. But at the finance committee, we all vote on this. So whatever is put forward. So what is the will of the assembly? Director Brander?
The recommendation.
Is there a seconder for that? Director Elliott. Okay, discussion on the recommendation, which is to contribute $238,244. Director Brander and then Director Gisborne.
I'm going to be quick. We've discussed this quite a bit. This initiative was supported strongly by the voters of areas A, B, and C. The number that it has come up with just falls in line with old agreements. So I see it as a good thing to support and a gesture of goodwill towards the city, with the hopes that we can work out a proper agreement in the coming months. But this gives them some assurity when they are finalizing their budget.
Thank you. Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I'm taking a look at our financial plan that we just moved on from, and under expenses, we have listed as a line item $233,000 as a potential contribution to the city of Powell River. And the motion before us is $238,000, which means that unless we adjust our financial plan, this motion is intentionally going over budget. I would think that it would be appropriate that we adjust the financial plan before we then decide to do the financial contribution to the municipality. Which step comes first? So I do completely agree with many of the comments around the table. 2018, a referendum was held for electoral areas A, B, and C to provide financial contributions to the city of Powell River for the operations of the recreation services. The service establishment bylaw that was created makes no mention of the recreation complex, nor any funding formula in relation to the recreation complex. Shortly after the service was established, the regional district entered into a negotiated funding agreement starting in January of 2019 with an expiration date of December the 31st, 2023. It was stipulated that extending the agreement would need to be done 6 months prior to its expiration date, which would have been June 2023. I believe the agreement was a good one. It sets the amount, it locked it in for 5 years. And the amount was based on 4 factors. Operational costs, subtracting operational revenues, multiplied by the shared floor area of the facility, and then multiplied by the percentage of population from the participating electoral areas. In 2018, this value was determined to be $177,000, and thus was the number used in the agreement quoted in the referendum and ultimately agreed upon. This is what was determined to be equitable at the time. I do believe everyone that is involved wants the electoral areas to participate an equitable and fair amount to the recreation center. The problem is that without any agreement, there seems to be significant controversy over what is fair and equitable. I see it in the municipality staff reports. In the agreement that has since expired, it actually says that when we do provide the finances, it is due August the 1st. We don't have to have it in middle of March for our budget. Also, as part of that agreement, the municipality would provide the operational costs to the board from the previous year. Now I'm looking at the agenda. I don't see any operational costs from the municipality. We've also just found out that the municipality is planning to increase their operational revenue for the recreation services by 10%. Now, as was previously mentioned, the formula also relies on the operational revenues. We don't have those figures. I'm very happy to put the appropriate amount of money in the budget, but I do think that we need to get the municipality to come to the table, or we go to their table and actually have a conversation. The municipality's budget is due May 15th. So thankfully we've got time to actually go over, and even if we get a one meeting and all we say is, hey, here's how much money you get for this year, but we need a commitment that the city council and the electoral area directors are going to continue the conversation and actually come to an agreement and sign another 5-year agreement, because we've been working without an agreement for well over a year now. And now we're in our 2nd year without an agreement. And it's creating difficulties between the municipal council and the electoral area directors. Right now, we're the ones that hold the money. We actually have the carrot to say, hey, come on over, come talk to us. So far, that's not happening. So this is where I have a bit of a problem, is I don't feel comfortable just handing money to the municipality without any agreement, because the agreement also stipulated that the money would be used for the recreation complex. Without an agreement, they could put it in our revenue. The municipality might go, let's charge the rural areas more than the municipal areas because we don't have an agreement in place. And I think that's a very easy thing to do. Council, board, sit down, have a conversation. We say, what are we going to do this year? Municipal council can let their intention be known. And maybe our agreement is very simple. That says, look, you charge our residents the same, give us the operational costs. This is the amount of money you get. And I would even be happy to round up the figure, because I think it's $238,000. Let's go to 240. Like, just to make it simple and easy, let's have the conversation. I don't see why there's such a rush to get this in right now, because under our old agreement, due in August. Because for those that don't know, regional districts don't actually get the money from the province until August. Municipality, they get their budgets done mid-May, and then I think it's like end of June, they start getting the people paying their tax roll. So I may be off with that. Either way, I think the point still stands. Happy to put the money in the budget, but I think that we actually do need to sit down and talk to the municipality. Otherwise, we're going to be in the same situation next year, and both parties are going to be going, well, you're not paying enough, and this isn't fair, and what's equitable? That's where both parties sit down and go, what do we consider fair and equitable? We're just getting the service review underway, and I think as part of that service review, we'll also cover long-term ownership and responsibility for the recreation complex. Maybe the regional district does actually want to take it on. It's a big ticket item, and I see some eyes, jumping out of people's heads. But I think we need to get in the same room together. And just for members of the public, the municipal directors that sit at our table are not representatives of the municipal council. The municipal council is a separate entity, and if the two municipal directors say, hey, this is what we support, the rest of council could easily outvote them. So I do believe it is electoral areas need to meet with council and come to an agreement, even a short one just for this year. And part of that agreement would be a commitment to say, you need to keep talking to us so that we can actually get like a proper deal that lasts for more than just the end of the month. It needs to last for 5 years. And I'm getting emails from the public, and part of those emails says, we need to get into another long-term agreement. Because otherwise, what happens is municipal council asks their staff to ask our staff to ask our board, and then our board asks our staff to talk to their staff to bring it back to council. And I'm going, man, that sounds like a lot of administration costs. When really we're just a couple of blocks away. That's my thoughts.
So I see Director Elliott, but I see Ms. Green had her hand up, and I think I'd take at least one question from what Director Gisborne just said, which is the number there doesn't match what's in the budget. So would passing this by the board cause any grief finalizing the budget? Corporate officer, I also see. So corporate officer first, maybe?
Well, I'll defer to Ms. Greenan. She has a suggested amendment.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, staff could use this motion as direction, but to make it really clear, we could add at the end and that the contribution be included in the 2025 budget of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan, just to make it clear that the board does want that added into the financial plan.
Okay, so maybe just because there's not full agreement around the table, I won't even try. Why don't I'll put forward a suggestion, someone make that as an amendment to the motion on the table. Would someone like to make that as an amendment? Director Branders, or someone who would like to second that amendment? Director Southcott. So discussion on the amendment, which is to add this, add this to our financial budget. Actually, Director Elliott was up next, and then Director Gisborne. So this is on the amendment. Director Elliott, go ahead.
Yeah, so prior to us making any suggestions about the amendment, I had the idea to have an amendment as well. And my preference would have been to amend the motion to not be about the contribution, but rather to be about the budget. Because I think what Director Gisborne is concerned about is not having it in the budget to decide about, but rather to decide about the contribution today and the exact amount of that commitment without conversation. And so my curiosity was about if we amended it rather than to do both, but to commit to put that in the budget, that number or 240 or whatever it is, and then we address the actual commitment around the contribution a little bit, maybe a month down the road after some conversation. We've got it in the budget to do that. It's clear that we intend to do that. And we do have some conversations prior to actually deciding what that amount would be. And I think that would address Director Gisborne's concerns. I think from the city perspective, when I'm over there, it's important to know that there is a commitment to contribute, and there will be one for our budget in order to do that. And so the difficulty then is, well, when do we intend to do that? And I'm also aware that we've had some incredible staffing pressures at the city throughout this entire term, and we're likely to see some more in the near future. We're at a 30% vacancy rate. We just received resignation letter from our CAO, and so we'll have to focus on trying to replace our CAO over there. And I don't know that we would we would necessarily have the bandwidth to enter into conversations like this. We could definitely have a conversation between our council and our board and ask for one, but whether it would work in a timely fashion to address things this year, given that there's also a service review, and I think we've the services review at this point in time, I don't think even includes any conversations with the city other than staff to give information. So the process at this point isn't exactly determined or decided. And so I think putting an amount forward that we intend to contribute would be good for clarity on all sides for this year. And if we accept that we probably won't land on another long-term agreement, at least in the short term, and we make decisions accordingly that are in good faith and consider the interests of everybody in our region, that's the best we can do. But if we addressed the motion about putting it into the budget separately from the actual contribution agreement, that might help some directors get there. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. So we have right now an amendment on the table, which is what we're talking about. Director McCormick, or I think Director Gisborne was next, and then Director McCormick.
I think Director Elliott actually clarified a lot of my thoughts and position. Was I think the first step is to set the item in the agenda for the amount, and then we do need to work with communication with the municipality. And part of my apprehension and concern is the staff shortages that are over at the municipality. And we have had these issues over the last year where we're not having this communication because a lot of it relies on our staff, which relies on their staff. And now with the resignation of the municipality's CAO, that also has a bit of a concern for me. And I feel like if we do just hand the money over, then we might not hear anything from them until next spring when we're in the same position as we were last spring. And I believe last year we set the money aside, and then I think it was something like December the municipality actually got the money. It is nice that it's earlier than that this time around. I would, with a proposed amendment on the floor, it is to add the budget change. I would also be willing to put forward an amendment on the amendment, which I'm not doing right now. I don't want to confuse the chair, to actually set that amount to $240,000. And then, I would say, let's put a pause on just handing the money over. Let's send a letter to even city council and say, can we invite them to a finance committee meeting? Could we invite them in, and just say, hey, all of council, come on over, sit down, we'll go through our books, bring the books you want, and then we can hammer out a very simple 1-year agreement. And part of that 1-year agreement would be, please keep talking to us and we'll try and work out a new 5-year agreement, which, looking at the old one, I think we could do some very minor tweaks and changes and get it updated. The service review, we've only had our first meeting, but one of the parts of the service review conversation was, hey, how do we get the municipality to come in and participate? When we have our next service review meeting, I think it's going to also start opening up those options, because for the members of the public that I don't know if it's been published yet, the service review meeting, the first meeting is simply identifying
Director Gisborne, can we focus on the amendment? We're going way off into service review and the
sorry, it was brought up.
So please, I know that's fine. I understand, and it's like something we all want to resolve. But
okay, I'm in favor of the
amendment.
But if the amendment then is passed and therefore becomes part of the motion, I would actually request that the motion be split so that we can focus and just get the budget items sorted out first before moving on to what we do with the money that's been budgeted.
Okay. Got it. Good. Director McCormick.
Thank you. I was just going to say that, it probably makes sense to have a formal conversation with the city. And there may be other topics as well. So I don't think we should decide right now about that, but I think we should perhaps consider, at a future committee of the whole, are there topics that we wish to discuss with city council and what those might be, and then work from that.
Okay, so we're talking about the amendment, which is to add to this a second clause, which is basically to add it to the financial plan. So let's focus on that first, and if no one else has a comment on the amendment, Director Lennox, and then Director Elliott. This is on the amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I appreciate the approach and the discussion, and I think two things can be true at the same time. We want to give surety to the city, but we also want to establish a rapport and get some details. So I really appreciate where we're headed now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Director Elliott.
So I'm a little concerned that the motion seems to be putting, and I don't know how to get to where we want to be. So I think approving the amendment gets us an amendment that deals with both the contribution agreement and the budget at the same time, which is clear and that's good. So I'm in favor in that sense. But it doesn't get us to the part where we can make sure it's in the budget, have a conversation, and then deal with the contribution agreement. And I just wonder if a question to staff is, when we pass this motion, it puts money in the budget, which it should. The actual contribution agreement, we could make a subsequent motion about how to address that, could we not?
Corporate Officer?
Through the chair, I think I would suggest, if you're interested in having this amount included in the budget, or the contribution amount, pass the amendment. You divide the question, deal with the amount to ensure that the contribution is in the budget, and then postpone the direction to contribute until a certain time, or something like that. There are procedural ways that we could.
Right, and the amendment helps us do that. Okay, thank you. That was my question.
Okay, good. So we're on the amendment. Let's try to make progress here. So I'm gonna call the question on the amendment, which is to get the amount 238,244 into the budget. So all in favor of the amendment? All opposed? None opposed. So now we got an amendment with two clauses. So I am anticipating something now. Director Gisborne.
I move that we split the motion.
Okay, so
2 parts. One. So I'll wait for the
Corporate Officer. So now it's split.
Prior to splitting, I had heard conversations about setting it at 240. Would that be the intention after the split?
Yes, if that's acceptable with the Assembly.
I would suggest moving an amendment right now to change the contribution amount to 240,000.
Okay, I move that we change the contribution amount to 240.
Is there a seconder for that? Director Elliott. Okay, so discussion on that is pretty straightforward. Hopefully we can get to a vote on that pretty quick. It's only 1,000 something. We understand the intent. So I'm going to call the question on this. All those in favor of changing the amount? Okay, none opposed. Or was there any opposed? I didn't see any hands up. Okay, that carries. Corporate Officer?
If the desire is to divide the question, there's no motion required for that.
No motion, exactly. So Director Gisborne has asked for it to be divided, so now it's divided. And so we have, normally we deal with the first one, which is the one in the agenda, except with 240. So if the Assembly so wishes, that would be postponed to a certain date or a certain event. So what's the wish of the Assembly? By default, that's on the before us is the contribution to the city. Director Elliott?
So my thinking is that we postpone the first section to coincide with a conversation with the city council, or directly after a conversation with city council. So we would have to also then have a motion, I guess, to have our chair invite city council to meet with us.
Right. So the motion, would that be in order, Corporate Officer, that to postpone this item until after the board has met with the city? I don't think we need to pass that other one. It just puts a triggering mechanism as far as I can see, but the Corporate Officer will correct me, I'm sure.
Thank you. That would postpone to a certain time.
Yeah.
That motion is in order.
It is in order. Okay, so is there a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, so discussion on postponing that first clause, which is the amount to the city, until after the board meets with the city, and that'll have to come up as this, either now or at the board. But Director Gisborne?
I just want to say this motion makes me very happy, and I hope that we're able to actually have a sit-down conversation with City Council and come to some kind of resolution, because this lack of having kind of an agreement, even a short-term one, has kind of kept me up at night since last year when it expired. And I think this is a good step forward to say we're increasing the amount, and we want to go sit down with City Council preferably before the municipal budget is finalized, and then we can come to an understanding for 2025, and then hopefully something more concrete for into the future. And thank you.
Okay, so further, Director McCormick.
Thank you. I have a question to our corporate officer. Is it, if we defer it till after we've had a conversation, but we don't know when the conversation would be, do we need a separate motion to invite city council to a meeting with us? Because the motion presumes that we will postpone this until the meeting takes place, but do we need a separate motion to request such a meeting?
If that's, if it's okay with the assembly, leave that with me, and if it's required, it will be on the board agenda at the end of the month.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So noting the time, so we want to try to make progress. So keep comments really focused, which was, I'm not saying any weren't focused. So just to point out our time. So I'm going to call the question on this first item, which is to postpone. Sorry, Director Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. Just to, I feel uneasily ambivalent about this. I will support it because I want to support anything that gets us toward conversation. My principal reason to support the whole idea is that going back to Director Brander's comments, last comment, this represents, from a standpoint of a city resident, this represents good faith. So this motion tends to compromise that just a tiny bit for me, which is what results in my uneasiness. However, I can, in a reciprocal sense, from the standpoint of being a city resident, still see it as good faith in the attempt to move forward to another agreement. So I really felt I needed to register that because I think it's important in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so is there any other discussion on this? This is to postpone. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, none opposed, that carried. Now we got the second clause, which is adding 240,000 to the budget for this item. Director Elliott?
So this is the part that would give me comfort around good faith. If we make sure that it's in the budget, it's a clear indicator that the board feels that they do intend to do a contribution and they want to have a conversation. And so passing this part of the motion would indeed give me comfort around good faith. Thank you.
Yeah, I concur with that. Director Gisborne?
Yes, I'm very happy with this motion as it puts the money in the budget. And as we've had a bunch of conversation, I don't think we want to put money in the budget and not use it. I don't think the directors are going to then say, okay, we're just going to leave it in the budget until next year. I think our intention is that we will be transferring this over to the municipality. I understand that, getting these conversations between our board and the municipality might be a bit of a challenge or take effort. And that's one of the reasons why we've actually increased it only by like $1,500. Granted, is not much, but at least it adds a bit, makes the carrot a little bit bigger. And so this is putting it in the budget saying, yep, it's there. And there's more steps to come.
Okay, is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, then I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, very good. We're done the biggest items, so we'll see what we get done in the next 10 minutes because we'll see if we finish or get to postpone it till after. Correspondence, we got 3 items of correspondence. Would anyone like to pull anything out from that? I don't believe anything needs to come out. Just maybe a question for our Ms. Green. In the correspondence from the library is already in our budget. Is that reflected there?
Thank you, Chair. No, it isn't. The original budget request is included. So I would need a motion to decrease the budget to the new amount.
Okay, so I'll suggest we pull out item 7.2. Otherwise, does anyone want to pull 7.1? We already dealt with, and 7.3. Okay, so dealing with 7.2 as 8.1, there's a suggested recommended revision to the budget to reduce it reduce the amount for the library based on revised budget requirements for the library. I can't see the board very well, but would someone like to make that motion if you're interested? Director Gisborne and Director McCormick. Okay, is there any discussion on this? It's good news. A bit less is always good. Director McCormick.
Let's just say thank you to Ms. Burbank for bringing forward a cost reduction. It's much appreciated.
Very good. Okay, so seeing no other questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, see if we get 9.1 done. That's the Lund Community Center temporary borrowing bylaw, short-term borrowing resolution. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to move all three, I guess, recommendations. They have ands, I think I can see. And maybe when I get a second, I'll just briefly speak.
Okay, seconded by Director Gisborne. Go ahead, Director Lennox.
Thanks. I think I appreciate the report. I think I understand it. Maybe just for the public and folks in my area, if Director of Financial Services, Manager of Financial Services, because it explained this process that we're in.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, so the borrowing for the Lund Community Center upgrade and expansion has already been approved. So we already have a borrowing bylaw in place. What this does is allows us to borrow temporarily until so we would just draw down the borrowing as it's needed to fund the construction. And then, and that's also what the $300,000 is too, is just to fund construction. And then when we're ready, then I would bring forward a security issuing bylaw, and we would go to the MFA and ask them for the long-term borrowing.
Right. So this is our short-term measure to get there.
Yes.
Excellent. I appreciate your description. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Director Lennox and Ms. Greenan. Is there any other discussion on this item? I think it's a good moving forward and nice to see progress. So I will then call the question. All those in favor? None opposed? Or carried unanimously. So I know we have 5 minutes left. I think we only have 2 items left on the agenda. So if the committee is okay, unless someone opposes, I'd rather just finish it rather than spending 10 minutes talking about when we redo it. So, okay, good. Hopefully we can be finished more or less on time, but the other meeting might start a little bit late. So tipping fees. So there's 2 items there. Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Yes, I put these 2 items on the agenda, and then we've heard from our Manager of Environmental Services that the second item is going to be coming forward in the staff report. So that makes me think the second item isn't even necessary. The first item in relation to yard waste and free organics diversion program, the intention there isn't to say, charge organics, yard waste, the same price as garbage. No, it's just, hey, if it's like, maybe we can charge some kind of tipping fee. But if that other report is coming forward, then I would even be willing to move to refer this item to staff to be considered in the upcoming report for time's sake.
Very appropriate. Very appropriate. So you're making that motion?
Sure, I will move to refer it to staff.
Okay, great. Is there a seconder by Director Lennox? Is there any discussion on referral? I see the corporate officer. Go ahead.
To be clear, we're referring the first one, Jen, right?
Yeah, because I think the second one's already coming.
Yeah, and I see Mr. Cohenhoven, so he knows it's coming his way, but it'll be added into that report, I assume. So I think it's all good. So any discussion on this? Further discussion? Seeing none, I will then call the question. All those in favor? Very good. Nice time efficiency there, Director Gisborne. So we're on to question period. Is there anyone in the room who has questions, or the online?
Galinsky from the Peak here. No questions this afternoon, Chair. Thank you very much.
No questions. We were crystal clear. Okay, is there anyone in the room that has questions? Oh, yes, we see one there.
You need my mug on the screen?
If you want it.
It helps the entire public know that you're here.
Thank you, Chair. I will not try and, I won't overindulge. And just quickly, who I am. My name is Guy Jenner. I live in Area C. I have a background of being in City Council in Delta. Operating budget way back when, 20 years ago, was $143 million. And on top of that capital, I was also on the public accounts in Victoria as an MLA. Great time. Talk nothing but numbers. And I was also the vice chair, parliamentary chair of Crown Corporations, the province of BC. And one of the items, of course, was the BC Assessment Authority, which leads me to the following questions. This is a very wealthy district, believe it or not, contrary to what people may think. I was taken with Municipal Director Elliott, who talked about the need for tax fairness. And I don't want to talk about, you're talking about expenditures. What's really missed here is revenue. Recently, I did a test pilot to see what's missing. And there is an industrial park that was not found or discovered by the BC Assessment Authority within the district. And one of the reasons being is the planning department is supposed to forthwith addresses of the parcel, and the BC Assessment Authority never received them. And what's happening in the district is it's not subdividing, but you're basically subletting, and you're awarding addresses to those sublets, but it's not captured by the BC Assessment Authority. And consequently, I believe you are losing a lot of potential revenue. My question today is not about going after small contractors or cottage industry, but what's happened over time is the industrial tax base has shifted from city into the district for good reasons. It's cheaper. Why not? And so what I have found is we appealed one industrial area that was comprehensive, industrial, warehousing, the whole parcel of different things. And it was assessed at the same assessment as the surrounding houses, even though it's a 2-acre parcel. Now, I did a comparable on something similar within the district, and that same industrial area should have been assessed at $2 million, but it was only assessed at $1 million. That is a lost revenue opportunity. And so when we talked to the BC Assessment Authority, they awarded an increase of $250,000, but they're going to come back with boots on the ground because this is endemic. There's an issue here where there is a real loss of potential assessment. And we talk about tax fairness. I'm assessed for one.
Uh-oh, my sound just went off.
We can talk all you want about cutting, but you're not looking at the potential revenue. When you look at what I looked, of course, at
Mr. Jenna, can I ask? This is for questions. Yeah, it's a good conversation, but yeah.
The question is, will the district, in coordination, of course, with the city, invite the BC Assessment Authority to do a comprehensive reassessment on all the improvements in the district to ascertain what the real wealth of this district is? Because if you want a fire hall, the money's there. It's not being gathered. It's not being captured. And I think a lot of it is because there is no zoning that's able to identify, as the Assessment Authority told me last week. So that's my question. And secondly, will the district properly hand in all addresses of residential, industrial, comprehensive properties to the BC assessment so they can do a proper assessment of the total wealth of the district?
Okay, thank you. Those are good questions, and I will hand them to the Manager of Financial Services, Ms. Greenan, to see what her response may be to.
Caleb, and just a quick supplemental. My estimation is you've lost $100 million in improvements within the district. That's my experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for coming before us. Ms. Greenan, do you have a response for Mr.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very intrigued, and I think that I will have a conversation with BC Assessment.
Yes, I think could be, if we're missing out on revenue, it could be really good. And I encourage Mr. Jenna to reach out to our, if I got your last name right, I hope, our staff to maybe provide whatever information beyond this meeting, because I think if there is something, great. If we can't do anything, that's what happens. But if we can, then that would be really nice. Director Elliott, is any other directors who might have questions? Director Elliott?
Thank you. I wanted to thank Mr. Genter for coming and asking that question. My question is to our staff about if there is a motion that can help us explore this that is required from us. Will it come forward on an agenda, or do we need to do something?
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. This might be a better question for the corporate officer. As far as now that I hear this information, I would just take it upon myself to at least start the investigation. But I'd like to hand it to the corporate officer to see if she thinks that there's something more that we should be doing.
As corporate officer. So yeah, is there any action, especially the staff might do or that the board might do to help look into this?
Thank you very much, Chair. I am aware of some conversations from our CAO PBC assessment about perhaps missing assessments. So I might first just leave it in the hands of staff to start the investigation and see where we're at. And then we'll come back to you if there's additional direction needed.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you, Mr. Genter, for coming before us. And apologies for rushing you on a bit there, but I think the question is really well heard, and I think we'll look into it. I think it's good information. Okay, is there any other party in the room that would like to ask a question? And I don't see any. Is there someone coming? No, I can't see, so I assume not. Okay, so we're done. There's no in-camera session. We are adjourned.